When we practice wrong, we lose countless lifetimes. A doctor makes a mistake, and one person may die. A teacher makes a mistake, and a generation may suffer. But when we practice wrongly, we may wander through countless lifetimes without even knowing we are lost. One sentence can wake a person up, and one wrong belief can quietly bury a life for years. In this narration, we stand beside ordinary people who sincerely want peace, freedom, and spiritual truth, yet may be walking in the wrong direction without realizing it. Before we judge anyone, we look first at ourselves. How easy it is to mistake comfort for wisdom, ritual for transformation, for spiritual progress. This is not a story about bad people doing bad things. It is about sincere hearts, tired hearts, religious hearts, grieving hearts, and hopeful hearts that may still be feeding the very chains they long to break. If you find this useful, subscribe to the channel, like this video, and leave a comment. There is a kind of mistake that frightens us immediately. A surgeon slips. A driver looks away for 1 second. A builder ignores a crack in the wall. These are visible errors. Their consequences are concrete. People react. People investigate. People correct. But the spiritual mistake is often more dangerous precisely because it does not look like a mistake. It can wear the clothing of devotion. It can sound humble. It can look disciplined. It can even be praised by family, admired by friends, and protected by tradition. And all the while, beneath the surface, it may be slowly strengthening delusion, attachment, fear, dependence, and ego. That is why this subject must be approached with tenderness and seriousness at the same time, not with accusation, not with spiritual arrogance, not with the easy habit of pointing at others and saying, "They are wrong, I am right." The real danger begins when we imagine this warning is meant for someone else. It is meant for us, for the one who prays every day but still burns with resentment, for the one who serves others but secretly craves recognition, for the one who clings to religious identity but has never truly examined the roots of suffering within, for the one who is exhausted by life and reaches for any promise of peace, never stopping to ask whether that peace is real freedom or only temporary comfort. Many people turn towards spiritual practice not because life is easy, but because life has become unbearable. A heartbreak that no one understands, a death in the family, a long illness, anxiety that follows them into the night, a quiet emptiness that success cannot fill, a sense that the world is loud, fast, and spiritually starving. They come seeking something sacred. They kneel, chant, read, meditate, bow, fast, donate, serve, retreat holy words, and try with all sincerity to become better human beings. And sincerity matters, it matters deeply. But sincerity alone does not guarantee right direction. A thirsty traveler can run with great determination toward a mirage. This is one of the hardest truths for the human heart to accept. We want effort to guarantee results. We want devotion to guarantee safety. We want good intention to guarantee truth. But in spiritual life, as in all serious matters, direction matters as much as effort, and understanding matters as much as faith. To move quickly in the wrong direction is not progress. To repeat an error for many years does not turn it into wisdom. To inherit a practice from others does not automatically make it liberating. And to feel emotionally moved by something does not prove it leads beyond suffering. That is why wrong practice can become more tragic than ordinary failure. If we fail in business, we may lose money and learn. If we fail in a relationship, we may suffer and grow. If we choose the wrong career, we may waste years, but eventually wake up and begin again. But when we practice wrongly in spiritual life, the loss can be hidden from us. We may believe we are purifying ourselves while actually decorating the ego. We may believe we are surrendering while becoming more dependent. We may believe we are becoming compassionate while quietly becoming more judgmental. We may believe we are moving toward awakening while tightening attachment to identity, control, and self-importance. and because it feels holy, we often do not question it. That may be the most dangerous part of all. When something appears worldly, we are alert. We are cautious about greed, ambition, vanity, and pleasure because we know they can deceive us. But when the same impulses enter through spiritual language, they become harder to detect. Pride can hide inside discipline. Craving can hide inside prayer. Fear can hide inside obedience. Attachment can hide inside loyalty. The hunger to feel special can hide inside the role of being a devoted practitioner. A person can give up many outer pleasures, yet remain deeply intoxicated with the inner pleasure of being seen as pure, advanced, chosen, faithful, or closer to truth than others. This is why some of the most sincere people are also the most vulnerable. Not because sincerity is a weakness, but because a sincere person may endure great hardship in the name of something they never properly examined. They may continue for years because they are loyal. They may silence their own questions because they believe doubt is a sin. They may ignore the hardening of their heart because the outer form of practice still looks respectable. They may continue bowing with the body while the mind grows more rigid, more fearful, more attached, and more divided from others from the outside. Everyone says, "What a devoted person," but inside, the roots of suffering remain untouched. Let us be very gentle here, because many listeners may recognize themselves in this. Not as hypocrites, not as frauds, but as human beings. Human beings are capable of incredible honesty and also incredible self-deception. We can hide from ourselves in beautiful ways. We can use noble language to protect old wounds. We can turn religion into a shelter where the ego survives in more sophisticated clothing. We can collect teachings the way others collect possessions. We can speak of compassion while refusing to release our grievances. We can speak of emptiness while clinging fiercely to being right. And still, none of this means we are hopeless. It means we must become honest. There is a profound difference between being spiritual and being transformed. There is a difference between performing sacred acts and allowing those acts to dissolve the self that clings, fears, compares, and grasps. There is a difference between being comforted by religion and being liberated by truth. Comfort is not always bad. Ritual is not always empty. Tradition is not always false. But if these things are never examined, they can become substitutes for the deeper work. Then practice becomes a mask, and the mask becomes so familiar that we forget there is a face beneath it, still trembling, still craving, still asleep. Some people are exhausted and simply want relief. They do not want philosophy. They do not want to question. They want a method, a prayer, a teacher, a path that will hold them together. That longing is deeply human. We should not mock it. But precisely because that longing is so vulnerable, it must be protected by wisdom. The desperate heart can attach quickly. The wounded heart can confuse emotional intensity with truth. The lonely heart can mistake belonging for awakening. The frightened heart can call dependence devotion. And once that confusion becomes part of our identity, we may defend it more fiercely than we defend truth itself. This is how spiritual error survives for generations, not always through evil, but often through unexamined repetition. A phrase is passed down, a ritual is repeated, a fear is inherited, a promise is believed. Nobody asks what this practice is doing to the mind. Nobody asks whether greed is weakening, whether anger is softening, whether delusion is thinning, whether compassion is deepening, whether freedom is becoming real. Instead, the measure becomes appearance, conformity, emotional comfort, or loyalty to form. We become busy around the sacred without being changed by it, and that is a devastating loss. Because a human life is rare, time is passing, the body is aging, the mind is being shaped every day by what it repeats, clings to, obeys, worships, and avoids. Every habit becomes a road. Every road leads somewhere. If our practice increases fear, it is leading somewhere. If it feeds pride, it is leading somewhere. If it deepens dependence on identity, it is leading somewhere. If it makes us less open, less honest, less compassionate, less awake, then no matter how holy it appears, we must have the courage to ask whether we are calling bondage by the name of devotion. This message is not meant to make anyone cynical. It is meant to make us real. There is no need to hate religion, no need to reject tradition, no need to become cold or rebellious. The invitation is much more intimate than that. Look carefully, look honestly. Look at what your practice is doing to your heart when no one is watching. Does it make you simpler or more complicated? Lighter or more burdened? More loving or more superior? More free or more afraid? More awake to reality? Or more attached to a spiritual image of yourself? These are not small questions. They are life-defining questions. Because if a person spends decades strengthening the wrong inner movement, those decades do not disappear. The grooves in the mind deepen. The habits of attachment become more elegant. The ego becomes harder to recognize because it now speaks in sacred language. It does not say, "Worship me." It says, "Protect your purity, defend your belief, preserve your image, stay where you feel spiritually important." And the person may never suspect that the voice guiding them is the very self they hope to transcend. This is why mistaken spiritual practice carries consequences deeper than ordinary human error. A worldly mistake can damage a chapter of life. A spiritual mistake can shape the whole direction of consciousness. It can influence how we suffer, how we hope, how we relate, how we die, and according to the deepest teachings, how we return again and again, not because the universe is punishing us, but because causes bear fruit. What we repeatedly cultivate becomes our tendency. What we repeatedly worship becomes our world. What we refuse to see in ourselves does not vanish. It follows us. So let us not rush forward with pride. Let us not listen with defensiveness. Let us not assume this warning belongs only to fanatics, extremists, or other traditions. The subtle errors are often the closest ones, the respectable ones, the inherited ones, the ones that make us feel safe, righteous, included, and certain. The ones we call devotion because devotion sounds beautiful, and beauty can sometimes hide danger better than ugliness ever could. To understand why the danger is so great, we first have to ask what it really means to practice wrong. What does it actually mean to practice wrong? It does not simply mean doing something obviously wicked. It does not mean that every person on a spiritual path who struggles, hesitates, doubts, or makes mistakes is lost. And it certainly does not mean that religion itself is the problem. The danger is more subtle than that. In many cases, practicing wrongly means that a person enters the path with real sincerity, real effort, even real sacrifice, but carries inside a confused purpose, a distorted understanding, or a deep attachment to appearances. The hands are busy with sacred things, but the heart does not yet know what it is doing. This is why the matter is so serious. Wrong practice can wear the clothing of devotion. It can sound like wisdom. It can look disciplined, moral, admirable, and pure. From a distance, it may even appear better than genuine practice. Because appearances are easy to polish, the inner life is harder. A person may wake early, bow deeply, chant for hours, donate generously, serve tirelessly, speak softly, and still remain inwardly bound by the very forces that the path was meant to loosen. Fear can remain, pride can remain, jealousy can remain, craving can remain. The self can remain at the center of everything, only now dressed in spiritual language. That is what makes mistaken practice so difficult to recognize. Evil often announces itself loudly. Confusion does not. Confusion can be very polite, very traditional, very emotional. It can be passed down from family, praised by community, reinforced by habit, and never questioned because it gives people identity and comfort. A person may not be trying to deceive anyone. In fact, they may be trying with all their heart to do something noble. But if they do not understand the purpose of the path, then effort alone, cannot save them from wandering. In Buddhist teaching, the heart of the problem is often described as wrong view. That phrase may sound abstract at first, but it is painfully practical. Wrong view means seeing life in a distorted way. It means misunderstanding what causes suffering, what ends suffering, and what this human life is for. If the view is crooked, then the direction will also be crooked. And when direction is wrong, energy becomes dangerous. The more sincere the effort, the farther one may travel from freedom while believing one is getting closer. Think of someone walking at night with a lamp in hand. The lamp is bright, the feet are strong, the will is determined. But if the road has been mistaken from the beginning, then every step of dedication only deepens the distance from home. This is why Buddhism places such weight on seeing clearly. Not because thought alone liberates us, but because blindness can disguise itself as virtue. We can be hard-working in our blindness. We can be loyal in our blindness. We can even suffer proudly in our blindness, and mistake that suffering for holiness. Many people assume spiritual practice is mainly about doing more religious activities, more chanting, more rituals, more donations, more scriptures, more pilgrimages, more hours of meditation, more visible signs of commitment. These things can be beautiful supports. They can nourish faith, gather the mind, soften selfishness, and connect us to a lineage of wisdom. But they are supports, not the destination. If they are done without inner transformation, then they remain external movements. The body participates, the mouth participates, the schedule participates, but greed, hatred, and delusion remain quietly enthroned within. A person can chant every day and never truly become aware of the state of their own mind. The words may pass over the lips like water over stone, while inside there is resentment, vanity, anxiety, and hidden bargaining. May this practice bring me advantage. May it protect my image. May it secure blessings for me. May others see that I am devoted. The chanting is not useless, but neither is it yet complete. Without awareness, sound can become habit, habit can become identity, and identity can become another prison. The same is true of giving. Generosity is praised in every noble tradition, and rightly so. But giving can also be mixed with subtle poison. One person gives to relieve suffering, another gives to be remembered, another gives to feel superior, another gives because fear whispers that blessings must be purchased. Outwardly, the act may look the same. Inwardly, the worlds are different. If giving does not gradually humble the ego, open the hand, and soften the hunger to possess, then even generosity can be bent towards self-making. We may give away money while feeding pride. We may build temples while reinforcing the invisible shrine of me. Meditation too can be misunderstood. Many imagine that sitting still is itself enough, as though silence automatically purifies the heart. But one can sit in silence and continue strengthening illusion. One can use meditation to escape responsibility, to numb pain, to protect an idealized self-image, or to chase pleasant states and call them awakening. If there is no honest observation of the mind, no recognition of attachment, no willingness to see anger, fear, fantasy, self-importance, and grasping as they arise, then meditation can become another refined form of sleep. The body is still, but delusion is active. Study can also go wrong in the same way. A person may see no scriptures, remember teachings, quote masters, discuss emptiness, karma, compassion, impermanence, non-self, and liberation with impressive fluency. Others may admire such knowledge, but if wisdom never enters conduct, then learning remains only intellectual decoration. When the teaching does not soften speech, restrain cruelty, expose self-deception, or deepen compassion, then study has become performance. The mind collects truths that the heart has not yet dared to live. This distinction between external activity and inner transformation is essential. The issue is not whether one chants, gives, meditates, studies, serves, or follows forms. The issue is what these acts are doing to the roots of the heart. Are they weakening greed or secretly feeding it? Are they dissolving pride or refining it into spiritual pride? Are they helping us face reality or helping us build a more elegant escape from reality? Are they bringing humility, tenderness, patience, and clarity? Or are they making us more rigid, more comparative, more self-righteous, more afraid? Because yes, a person can become extremely disciplined and still remain deeply unfree. Discipline by itself is not liberation. Admiration from others is not liberation. A reputation for holiness is not liberation. Being known as devout is not liberation. One may become a model of religious commitment in the eyes of a community, while inwardly being driven by fear of punishment, fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty, fear of being ordinary. Another may be driven by pride. I practice than others, I understand more than others, I am purer than others. Another may be driven by comparison, always measuring, always competing, always secretly needing to feel ahead. Another may be driven by craving, turning the path into a marketplace of blessings, attainments, powers, recognition, or emotional comfort. This is one of the saddest forms of bondage, because it often receives applause. Society sees the outer discipline and assumes the inner work is complete. But Buddhism asks a harsher and more merciful question. What is happening in the mind that performs these acts? Not to condemn the person, but to protect them. Because if the roots remain untouched, suffering remains untouched. And if suffering remains untouched, then the wheel continues to turn, even while one believes one is escaping it. This is why wrong view matters so deeply. Wrong view does not merely produce a few mistakes along the way. It shapes the whole meaning of practice. If someone believes the path is mainly about securing divine favors, then their devotion will revolve around bargaining. If someone believes the path is about becoming spiritually superior, then their effort will nourish comparison. If someone believes rituals alone can replace ethical transformation, then they will neglect the purification of conduct. If someone believes temporary calm is the same as liberation, they may stop at the doorway and call it the destination. And the painful truth is that sincerity alone does not correct these errors. We often speak of sincerity as though it were enough. In one sense, sincerity is precious. Without sincerity, practice is hollow from the beginning. But sincerity tied to ignorance can still do damage. A sincere person can still follow a false map. A sincere person can still reinforce ego while trying to destroy ego. A sincere person can still cling more tightly while believing they are letting go. Good intention is beautiful, but good intention without wisdom is unstable. It can drift into fanaticism, superstition, dependence, or subtle self-worship without ever noticing what has happened. That is not a reason to despair. It is a reason to become honest. The point is not to make people paranoid about every practice or ashamed of every imperfection. The point is to awaken discernment, to ask quietly with courage, why am I doing this? What am I seeking? What in me grows stronger through this practice? And what grows weaker? Am I becoming more truthful or merely more religious? More compassionate or merely more correct? More free or merely more decorated? These are not accusations. They are acts of mercy, because the path is not meant to make us impressive. It is meant to make us awake. It is not meant to build a more sacred identity for the self to inhabit. It is meant to reveal the mechanisms of clinging and gradually loosen them. It is not meant to teach us how to look pure while remaining inwardly divided. It is meant to heal that division. So practicing wrongly is not simply belonging to the wrong label, joining the wrong group, or performing the wrong ceremony. Much more often, it is carrying the wrong relationship to practice itself. It is using the path for what the path was never meant to serve. It is treating medicine like ornament, treating teachings like status, treating discipline like theater, treating devotion like transaction. And because these mistakes arise so easily in ordinary human psychology, They can happen to almost anyone. That is why this teaching must be heard with tenderness and seriousness together. Tenderness, because many who practice wrongly are not evil people. They are wounded people, frightened people, longing people, conditioned people, sincere people who have never been taught to look deeply enough. Seriousness, because the consequences are not small. If view remains distorted, then years of effort may produce only a stronger ego, a holier mask, a subtler attachment, and a more painful disappointment. Once we see that wrong practice is possible even among sincere people, the next question becomes uncomfortable. Why do so many of us fall into it? Why do so many sincere people lose the way? Not because they are foolish, not because they are morally weak, and not because their longing for truth is fake. Very often, the opposite is true. They lose the way because they are human. They hurt, they hope, they fear, they carry old conditioning, and in moments of inner hunger, the wrong path can feel strangely comforting. Pain makes us vulnerable in ways we rarely admit. A person who is grieving does not always want truth first. They want relief. A person betrayed by someone they trusted does not always seek wisdom first. They want something solid to hold. A person facing illness, aging, or the slow humiliation of losing control over body and future may not be looking for deep transformation. They may simply be begging life for one clear sign that everything is not falling apart. When loneliness settles into the bones, when disappointment repeats itself so many times that hope becomes tiring, the heart becomes hungry for immediate comfort, and in that hunger, easy answers begin to feel holy. This is one of the great dangers in spiritual life. Suffering can open us, but suffering can also weaken discernment. When we are desperate, we are less likely to ask careful questions. We are more likely to accept whatever soothes us fastest. If someone says, "Do this ritual and your pain will disappear," the wounded mind wants to believe. If someone says, "Follow me and all confusion will end," the exhausted heart feels tempted. If someone says, "You are special, chosen, protected, unlike the blind crowd," then the lonely part of us feels seen, perhaps for the first time in years. That does not mean these people are bad. It means pain changes how we listen. Pain narrows our horizon. It makes immediate emotional relief feel more important than long-term liberation. And that is why many mistaken forms of practice spread not through cruelty, but through comfort. They offer certainty to the uncertain, belonging to the isolated, meaning to the disoriented, and a simple explanation to the soul that can no longer bear complexity. There is a reason certainty is so seductive. True practice often requires patience, humility, and the willingness to remain honest inside unresolved questions. It asks us to look at greed, even when greed is embarrassing. It asks us to look at anger even when anger feels justified. It asks us to look at delusion even when delusion protects our self-image. Real transformation is not always dramatic. It may be quiet, repetitive, and slow. It may not flatter us. It may not give us the role of hero in our own story. And for the ego, that can feel disappointing. So many people drift toward teachings that provide a more pleasing experience. Teachings that say, "You are already higher than others." Teachings that promise quick reward for visible acts. Teachings that remove ambiguity and make everything seem neatly arranged. Teachings that divide the world into the pure and the impure, the awakened insiders and the ignorant outsiders, the saved and the doomed. The human mind often prefers this because clarity, even false clarity, feels safer than honest uncertainty. To be told that spiritual life is difficult, subtle, and full of self-examination is not always appealing. To be told that our motives are mixed, that our devotion can hide desire, that our discipline can hide pride, that our knowledge can become vanity. This is sobering, but to be told, "You are doing wonderfully. Your group alone knows the truth. Your rituals guarantee blessings. Your identity proves your worth." This is intoxicating. It gives the self something it desperately wants. importance without surrender. And this is how mistaken practice can become emotionally addictive. It does not merely offer beliefs. It offers psychological rewards. It gives the practitioner a sense of control in an uncontrollable world. It gives the frightened mind an answer for everything. It gives the insecure ego a costume of holiness. It gives the wounded heart a group in which to belong. It gives people language that sounds elevated, while leaving the roots of greed, anger, and delusion largely untouched. Many do not notice this at first, because on the surface, everything can appear religious, disciplined, even devout. There may be ceremonies, sacred words, moral slogans, strict rules, respected leaders, and a strong collective atmosphere. But outer intensity is not the same as inner awakening. A person may become more active in religion, while becoming no less reactive at home. They may become more skilled at reciting teachings, while remaining deeply attached to praise and deeply wounded by criticism. They may become very serious about form, while still being driven by jealousy, resentment, fear, or spiritual ambition. And because these inner movements are subtle, they can go unexamined for years. Inherited habit plays a powerful role here. Many people do not arrive at spiritual practice through deep inquiry. They inherit it the way they inherit food preferences, family phrases, holiday customs, and emotional patterns. They bow because their parents bowed. They repeat words because their grandparents repeated them. They keep certain dates, light certain incense, visit certain places, avoid certain taboos, and perform certain acts because this is what their community has always done. Sometimes this creates wholesome continuity, but sometimes it creates imitation without understanding. A person can spend decades inside a spiritual culture and still never ask the most important question. What in this actually weakens greed, lessens anger, and clarifies delusion in ordinary daily life? Not in theory, not in public performance, not in festival mood, but in traffic, in marriage, in business, in disappointment, in conflict, in aging, in temptation, in loss. If a practice does not gradually selfishness, deepen honesty, and steady the mind, then however beautiful the tradition around it may look, something essential is being missed. Yet many people hesitate to ask this, because inherited forms carry emotional weight. To question them can feel like questioning one's parents, one's ancestors, one's whole community. It can feel disloyal, arrogant, or cold. Some fear that if they look too deeply, they will lose the comfort of belonging. Others fear they will discover that much of what they trusted was never examined properly. So they continue, not always from conviction, but from momentum. Habit becomes faith's substitute. Repetition becomes proof. Familiarity becomes truth. Fear is one of the strongest forces holding all of this together. Some practice not from understanding, but from anxiety. Fear of bad karma, fear of punishment, fear that if they miss a ritual, something terrible will happen. Fear that if they do not make enough offerings, blessings will disappear. Fear that if they question a teacher, they will be cursed by their own doubt. Fear that if they step outside the accepted pattern, they will lose protection, community, status, or spiritual identity. This fear can wear religious language and still remain fear. It may sound devout, but inwardly it is often contract-minded. I must do this so that nothing bad happens. I must obey so that I remain safe. I must conform so that I am not rejected. In this state, practice becomes less about awakening and more about appeasement. The mind is not being liberated, it is being managed through anxiety. There is also the fear of being different. Human beings are social creatures. We do not want to stand alone, especially not in matters considered sacred. If everyone in the family believes a certain ritual guarantees merit, who wants to be the one asking whether merit can really be bought through form alone? If the whole community praises a charismatic figure, who wants to be the one saying, something feels off? If questioning is interpreted as disrespect, then silence becomes easier than honesty. And so many people continue in practices they do not fully understand. Because belonging feels safer than truth, they may even sense the contradiction. They may notice that certain teachings increase pride rather than humility, fear rather than freedom, division rather than compassion. But the cost of speaking or even thinking clearly feels too high. They do not want to disappoint elders. They do not want to lose friends. They do not want to become spiritually homeless. So they remain inside patterns that no longer nourish wisdom, hoping that sincerity alone will somehow make the path safe. This is why we must be compassionate when we speak about wrong practice. Beneath many errors lies something deeply human, even beautiful. A son prays because he misses his dead mother. A woman clings to ritual because sickness has made her life uncertain. An old man repeats sacred words because they are the only thread connecting him to meaning after a lifetime of struggle. A young person joins a strict spiritual circle because chaos at home made structure feel like salvation. These longings are not ugly. They arise from love, grief, vulnerability, and the wish not to be abandoned by life. But beautiful longing is not enough. A thirsty person may drink poison if poison is offered in a golden cup. A frightened person may surrender discernment for the sake of comfort. A sincere person may mistake emotional intensity for insight, obedience for wisdom, or belonging for liberation. The purity of the longing does not automatically purify the path. This is the sorrowful truth. We can want something sacred and still walk towards something false. We can kneel with a genuine heart and still strengthen illusion. That is why tenderness must walk beside discernment. We should not mock those who get lost. We should not imagine that we ourselves are beyond such confusion. Under enough pressure, with enough pain, with enough unexamined fear, almost anyone can be drawn toward a path that promises too much, questions too little, and flatters the hidden self. The issue is not whether longing exists. The issue is whether longing is guided by wisdom, tested by truth, and translated into real transformation of mind and conduct. A practice is not made right because it is ancient. It is not made true because many people do it. It is not made liberating because it produces strong emotion. It is not made noble because it uses sacred language. We have to ask, quietly and honestly, after all this praying, bowing, chanting, giving, following, fearing and hoping, is the heart becoming less greedy? Is the mind becoming less hateful? Is delusion loosening? Even a little, am I more honest, more humble, more compassionate, more free? Or am I simply becoming more identified with being a spiritual person? These are uncomfortable questions, but they are merciful questions. They protect us from wasting years decorating the cage while calling it freedom. They protect us from confusing movement with progress and tradition with transformation. They protect us from taking our pain, our fear, our need to belong, and our inherited habits, and building from them a spiritual identity that looks impressive but cannot carry us across suffering. So when we ask why good people still lose the way, the answer is not simple. It is grief, it is loneliness, it is exhaustion, it is the craving for certainty, it is the seduction of being told we are special, it is habit inherited without inquiry, it is fear of punishment, fear of exclusion, fear of missing blessings, fear of standing apart. It is the ache to be held by something larger than our confusion. And all of this can live inside a person who is kind, sincere and deeply earnest. That is what makes this so tragic and so urgent. The heart's longing may be pure, but if it is not clarified by wisdom, examined by truth, and grounded in the work of transforming greed, anger, and delusion, then longing itself can become the doorway through which confusion enters. And when that longing is not guided carefully, the ego learns how to wear spiritual clothing. And that is where the danger becomes even more subtle. The ego does not always stand in front of us wearing pride openly. It does not always say, I want to dominate, I want to be admired, I want to be above others. Sometimes it kneels, sometimes it bows, sometimes it speaks softly, lowers its eyes, quotes holy words, and appears devout. But inside it is still asking for the same old thing: to be somebody, to be superior, to be safe through identity, to feel larger by making others smaller. This is one of the hardest truths to face on the spiritual path. The mind can take religion, which was meant to free us, and turn it into a costume for self-importance. It can take practice, which was meant to soften us, and use it to become more rigid. It can take teachings, meant to dissolve illusion, and turn them into decorations for the very illusion they were meant to undo. A person begins to think quietly at first. I am more serious than others. I am more disciplined. I understand what most people do not. My path is purer. My teacher is higher. My tradition is more authentic. My faith is stronger. My renunciation is deeper. My insight is more mature. These thoughts may never be spoken aloud. In fact, they often hide beneath humble language, but they shape the heart. And once they do, religion is no longer being used as a mirror. It is being used as a crown. This happens more easily than most people realize. Because identity is hungry, it always wants something to attach to. If it cannot feel special through money, it will try through morality. If it cannot rise through beauty, it will rise through sacrifice. If it cannot dominate through worldly success, it will dominate through spiritual image. The costume changes, but the movement is the same. That is why spiritual pride is so dangerous. Ordinary pride is sometimes easier to detect. It boasts, it exaggerates, it shows itself. But spiritual pride often hides behind virtue. It says, I am only serving. It says, I am only protecting the truth. It says, I am only preserving standards. It says, I am only being faithful. And maybe part of that is true. That is what makes it so difficult. Wrong practice rarely comes wearing a completely false face. It usually borrows the language of sincerity, while quietly feeding attachment underneath. You can see this in simple everyday ways. A person begins collecting teachings, not to digest them, not to live them, but to feel impressive through them. They know the names of scriptures, teachers, lineages, methods, philosophies. They can speak beautifully about emptiness, compassion, surrender, awareness, devotion. They can compare schools, quote passages, explain subtle distinctions. But if you watch carefully, all that knowledge is not making them more tender, more honest, more patient, more free. It is making them feel established. It is becoming a possession. And teachings can become one of the most elegant possessions of all. Because unlike wealth, they appear noble. Unlike jewelry, they can be worn invisibly. A person can carry spiritual vocabulary the way someone else carries status symbols. Every conversation becomes a chance to display understanding. Every question becomes a chance to show refinement. Even listening is no longer listening. It is waiting for the right moment to reveal how much one knows. The same thing happens with visible piety. The way one dresses, speaks, posts, serves, prays, sits, eats, gives, or restrains oneself can slowly become part of a performance. Again, not always consciously. Often the person does not wake up one morning and decide to be false. It happens gradually. The heart begins by wanting to belong, wanting to be good, wanting to be worthy. Then the image of goodness becomes important. Then preserving that image becomes more important than truth. And once that happens, the person is no longer asking, am I transforming? They are asking, how am I being seen? There are people who seek status through service and do not know they are doing it. They volunteer tirelessly, but become wounded if their effort is not recognized. They give generously, but keep secret accounts inside the mind. They sacrifice sleep, comfort, time, and money. But somewhere beneath the offering is a quiet demand. See me, value me, remember what I have done. If appreciation comes, they feel energized. If it does not, bitterness appears. Not because service is wrong, but because the ego has entered the temple and sat down at the altar. There are also people who compete in suffering. They compare who fasts more, who sleeps less, who endures more discomfort, who gives up more pleasure, who follows rules more strictly, who has fewer possessions, who appears less attached. Renunciation becomes a contest. Simplicity becomes a badge. Austerity becomes identity. Instead of reducing craving, practice creates a subtler craving, the craving to be admired for not craving. This is spiritual materialism in one of its most painful forms. The outer act may still look noble. Silence may still be kept. Charity may still be given. Meditation may still be practiced. Fasting may still be observed. Service may still be rendered, but inwardly, these acts are no longer dissolving the self-centered pattern. They are feeding it. The ego learns how to survive by eating sacred things. A person may keep silence, not to discover peace, but to appear profound. They may fast, not to clarify desire, but to feel morally superior. They may give charity not from compassion, but from the need to see themselves as good. They may meditate not to understand the mind, but to strengthen an image of being advanced, centered, elevated, awakened. They may speak of surrender while clinging fiercely to how they are perceived. This is why noble practice alone is not enough. The same action can liberate one person and imprison another, depending on the state of the heart. Two people may bow in the same room, recite the same prayer, sit in the same meditation hall, serve in the same kitchen, donate to the same cause. Outwardly they appear alike. Inwardly they may be traveling in opposite directions. One is becoming simpler, softer, less burdened by self. The other is becoming more identified, more defended, more secretly convinced of personal holiness. And the frightening part is this: the more sacred the behavior appears, the harder it is to question. When someone is visibly worldly, we more easily recognize vanity. But when vanity wraps itself in devotion, many people applaud it. Some even call it righteousness. The person receives reinforcement from the community, from followers, from family, from students, from friends. They are praised for discipline, admired for knowledge, respected for service, seen as mature, even envied for their commitment. All of this makes self-deception stronger. Soon correction feels like attack. Feedback feels like disrespect. Honest questioning feels like persecution. Why? Because if identity has fused with spiritual image, then any challenge to that image feels like a threat to the self. This is one of the clearest warning signs of wrong practice, the inability to accept correction. A truly practicing heart may feel embarrassed, may even it resist at first, but it remains teachables. It can reflect. It can ask, is there truth here I do not want to see? But when ego has dressed up as faith, the person cannot bear that question. They defend, justify, quote, invoke loyalty, or accuse others of impurity. Another sign is contempt, not always loud contempt. Sometimes it is subtle, almost polite. A small tightening when others speak. A hidden dismissal of those seen as less disciplined, less informed, less devout. A secret belief that ordinary people are asleep while we are awake. A constant dividing of the world into the serious and the superficial, the chosen and the lost, the pure and the compromised. Contempt is poison on any spiritual path, because the moment we use truth to stand above others, we have already abandoned the heart of truth. Then there is obsession with appearance, not just physical appearance, but moral and spiritual appearance. How things look becomes more important than what they are. The public image of harmony matters more than actual honesty. The image of purity matters more than real purification. The image of compassion matters more than actual kindness. The image of wisdom matters more than the humility to admit confusion. A person may become very skilled at looking peaceful while being inwardly restless. Looking surrendered while inwardly controlling, looking kind while inwardly resentful. Emotional rigidity is another sign. The heart that is truly ripening becomes more alive, not less, more human, not less. It can be quiet without becoming cold, disciplined without becoming harsh, clear without becoming brittle. But when ego runs the practice, the person often becomes stiff. They lose warmth, they fear spontaneity. They cannot laugh easily at themselves. They cannot grieve honestly. They cannot say, "I was wrong." Their spirituality becomes a structure they hide inside. It protects them from vulnerability while pretending to lead them toward freedom. And then there is dependence on praise. This one can hide for years. A person may say they seek only God, only truth, only awakening, only liberation, but their mood rises and falls with recognition. If others admire their practice, they feel strong. If no one notices, they feel empty. If they are respected, they feel confirmed. If they are overlooked, they feel hurt. Their peace depends not on realization, but on reflection from others. And that is a very fragile faith, because it is still built on the hunger to be seen. We must be very compassionate when we speak about this, because nearly all sincere practitioners meet this danger in some form. This is not a flaw of bad people. It is a tendency of the unexamined mind. The ego is clever, adaptive, patient. It does not disappear just because we enter a monastery, attend a temple, kneel in prayer, study scripture, or sit on a meditation cushion. It follows us there. It learns the language there. It studies the atmosphere there. It even learns how to imitate humility there. So the question is not, have I ever used spirituality to strengthen self-image? For most of us, if we are honest, the answer is yes. The real question is, am I willing to keep seeing it? Am I willing to be humbled without collapsing? Am I willing to let practice expose me, not decorate me? This is where sincerity becomes real, not when we appear holy, but when we become honest enough to discover the ways we still worship ourselves. Because the holier the mask, the more painful it is to remove. If I think I am merely confused, I can learn. If I think I am broken, I can seek help. But if I think I am spiritually superior, then my prison becomes almost invisible to me. I will guard it as if it were treasure. I will defend it in the name of truth. I will remain trapped while speaking the language of freedom. And this is how wrong practice can continue for years, even decades. Not through obvious rebellion against wisdom, but through subtle loyalty to a false self built out of sacred materials. The person may still be active, respected, disciplined, admired. They may even believe they are progressing, yet the old roots remain alive. Greed in the form of wanting spiritual gain, aversion in the form of judgment and rejection, delusion in the form of misreading ego as awakening. If we do not see this danger, then religion becomes one more place where bondage hides. The robes change, the rituals change, the vocabulary changes, but the chain remains, and when the chain is made of holy symbols, it is harder to break because we are afraid to question what looks sacred. That is why vigilance must be gentle but relentless. We must ask again and again, is this practice making me kinder? Is it making me less defensive, less hungry for praise, more able to receive correction, more honest about my motives, more compassionate toward those who walk differently, less occupied with image, more free from the need to be special? If the answer is no, then something has gone wrong, no matter how beautiful the outer form appears. And if the answer is yes, the heart becomes quieter, simpler, less interested in comparison, less intoxicated by identity. There is more humility, more tenderness, more spaciousness. The need to be seen begins to loosen. The need to be right begins to soften. The need to be superior begins to dissolve. This is not dramatic, it is not performative. It is often almost invisible, but it is real, and still, ego is only one danger. Another comes when we mistake religious form for spiritual depth. This is where the path becomes especially delicate, because outer devotion can look so convincing, even to the one performing it. A person may wake before dawn, wash careful light incense with reverence, bow with precision, chant for an hour, recite sacred names with tears in the eyes, give money to the temple, Volunteer at ceremonies, observe holy days, avoid missing important rituals, and maintain a schedule that appears deeply spiritual. From the outside, everything seems in order. Even from the inside, it may feel meaningful. There is structure, there is beauty, there is a sense of direction. But when the chanting ends and the incense smoke fades, another question quietly remains. What kind of person rises from that cushion and walks back into ordinary life? Because that is where practice reveals its truth. If someone bows every morning but still humiliates family members with sharp words, what exactly is bowing softening? If someone chants scriptures daily but still burns with jealousy whenever another person succeeds, what exactly is chanting illuminating? If someone donates generously to religious causes but cheats in business, manipulates others, or lies when convenient, then the hands may be offering, but the heart is still grasping. And if someone visits temples faithfully, knows the correct forms, honors every holy date, and yet cannot forgive one old wound, cannot let go of one bitter story, cannot stop needing to feel morally above others, then something essential has been left untouched. This is not said to insult ritual. It is said to rescue it. Ritual is not the enemy. Form is not the problem. Bowing can humble the body and remind the mind to kneel before truth. Chanting can gather scattered attention and steady the heart. Offerings can train generosity. Incense can mark a transition from distraction to presence. Sacred routines can protect a person from chaos and help devotion mature through repetition. Human beings need forms. We need rhythm. We need reminders. We need visible actions to support invisible intention. There is nothing wrong with this. In many cases, it is beautiful, necessary, and deeply skillful. But ritual becomes empty when it is cut off from awakening. It becomes a shell when awareness is absent. It becomes performance when compassion is missing. It becomes decoration when ethical discipline is ignored. It becomes spiritual theater when insight does not deepen. Then even holy actions can become strangely lifeless, not because the actions themselves are flawed, but because they are no longer connected to transformation. A person can become very faithful to the habit and completely unfaithful to its purpose, and this happens more easily than most people want to admit. There are people who feel inwardly accomplished because they have done their religious duties. They have completed the recitations. They have attended the ceremony. They have made the offering. They have worn the proper clothes, spoken the proper phrases, followed the proper calendar. So a subtle conclusion begins to form. I am doing well. I am a sincere practitioner. I am not like ordinary people. I am close to the path. But then life presses on the heart, and the truth appears. A small disagreement arises, and anger erupts immediately. A relative says something careless, and resentment takes hold for weeks. A colleague receives praise, and envy quietly poisons the mind. A stranger makes a mistake, and contempt appears before compassion. Someone offers correction, and defensiveness hardens the face. Another person practices differently, and judgment rushes in. In those moments, we begin to see that spiritual activity and spiritual maturity are not the same thing. Many people know how to perform devotion. Far fewer allow devotion to expose them, purify them, and remake them. That is the harder work. It is much easier to kneel than to surrender pride. Much easier to recite than to watch the movement of irritation before it becomes speech. Much easier to bring flowers to the altar than to uproot bitterness from the heart. Much easier to donate publicly than to practice honesty when dishonesty would bring advantage. Much easier to keep a sacred schedule than to remain gentle when tired, inconvenienced, misunderstood, or not appreciated. And yet that is exactly where the path lives. A person may say, I have been practicing for 20 years. But 20 years of what? 20 years of repetition, or 20 years of awakening? 20 years of habit, or 20 years of seeing through the self? 20 years of religious identity, or 20 years of becoming less harsh, less selfish, less reactive, less imprisoned by craving and aversion. Time alone proves nothing. Religious effort alone proves nothing. Activity can accumulate while delusion remains almost untouched. Sometimes ritual gives us a dangerous kind of comfort, because it allows us to feel that something sacred is happening without requiring us to look too closely at our own minds. Repetition can soothe anxiety. Familiar forms can calm the nervous system. Community rituals can create belonging, continuity, and emotional safety. These things are real, they matter. A person overwhelmed by life may find genuine support in lighting a candle, hearing a chant, entering a temple, or following a discipline passed down through generations. There is tenderness in that. There is medicine in that. But soothing is not the same as liberation. To be soothed is to feel temporarily settled. To be liberated is to no longer be ruled in the same way by greed, hatred, and delusion. These are not equal. A person may leave a ceremony feeling peaceful, and yet within an hour be trapped again in irritation, comparison, gossip, fear, and self-importance. The peace was pleasant, but it did not penetrate deeply enough to free the heart. This does not mean the ceremony was useless. It means the work is not finished and perhaps has barely begun. There is also the comfort of belonging. Ritual tells us where to stand, when to bow, what to say, how to move. It places us among others doing the same thing. This can ease loneliness. It can help us feel held by tradition, protected by lineage, carried by a wisdom larger than ourselves. But even this can become seductive if we are not careful. We may begin to love being part of the group more than we love truth. We may become attached to appearing devout in the eyes of the community. We may draw identity from our religious role while neglecting the painful, humbling, private work of transformation. Then religion stops being medicine and becomes costume. This is why some people can be deeply involved in sacred life and yet remain difficult to live with. They know ceremonies but not patience. They know doctrine but not humility. They know offerings but not forgiveness. They know reverence in the temple but not tenderness in the home. They can speak beautifully about compassion while treating service workers with coldness. They can bow before statues and then return to speaking cruelly about neighbors, relatives, or those who disagree with them. They can praise the teachings on non-attachment and still cling fiercely to status, opinion, and grievance. They can discuss karma and morality while secretly feeding pettiness, pride, and hostility. This contradiction is painful to witness because it is not merely hypocrisy in the simple sense. Often, these people are not pretending entirely. They may truly feel devotion. They may sincerely love the path as they understand it. They may cry during chanting and feel elevated during worship, but they have mistaken the emotional atmosphere of practice for the fruit of practice. They have mistaken proximity to sacred things for inner change. They have mistaken being around truth for being transformed by truth. And this danger does not belong only to other people. It lives in all of us. Who among us has not at times felt secretly pleased after doing something spiritual? Who has not thought in some subtle way, at least I am practicing, at least I am making merit, at least I am more serious than those who do not care? Who has not used one good act to hide from one unresolved pattern? Who has not taken comfort in outer correctness while avoiding some inner dishonesty? This is why the examination must be gentle but unsparing. If we make it accusatory, the ego will defend itself. If we make it sentimental, the ego will escape unchanged. So we have to ask difficult questions and stay long enough to hear the real answer. After all these years of prayer, chanting, bowing, study, service, and attendance, has the heart actually become lighter? Not more decorated, not more informed, not more convinced, but lighter? Is there less resentment to carry, less hunger to win every argument, less obsession with being acknowledged, more capacity to pause before reacting, more willingness to admit fault, more softness toward the weakness of others, more honesty about one's own motives, more patience when things do not go as planned, more freedom from the old need to be superior. Or has practice only made the self more religious, more certain, more defended, more proud of its own image? This is a frightening question, because it asks us to consider that we may have spent years reinforcing the very thing we thought we were dissolving. The ego can wear prayer beads, vanity can kneel, pride can memorize scripture, attachment can hide inside discipline, superiority can dress itself as piety, and because the forms are sacred, the illusion becomes harder to detect. We assume holiness must be present because the symbols are holy. But symbols cannot do the work for us. Temples cannot digest our anger. Incense cannot confess our dishonesty. Chanting cannot replace the courage required to face envy, greed, resentment, and self-deception directly. The path asks for participation much deeper than attendance. It asks that every ritual become a mirror. When you bow, what in you refuses to bow? When you chant, what in you remains noisy, agitated, possessive, and afraid? When you make offerings, what in you still bargains for recognition? When you light incense, what in you still clouds the mind of others with harshness and blame? When you enter a sacred place, do you become sacred in conduct, or only respectful in posture? These are not questions meant to shame. They are questions meant to wake us up before habit becomes destiny. Because one of the greatest tragedies on the spiritual path is not the person who knows they are lost. It is the person who feels safe because they are busy with holy things, while the roots of suffering remain alive and unexamined. Such a person may continue for years, even decades, sincerely repeating actions that never descend into the deepest chambers of the heart. And over time, this can create a subtle hardness. One becomes less teachable, not more, less open, not more, less curious, not more. The forms remain, but living insight dries up. Then ritual is no longer serving freedom. It is serving illusion. And when ritual becomes a shelter for illusion, suffering does not disappear. It simply becomes harder to diagnose. And that is where the hidden cost begins. A wrong path does not always look dramatic from the outside. Often it looks disciplined. It looks devoted. It looks admirable. Parents early bows sincerely, recites carefully, attends gatherings, speaks noble words, avoids obvious wrongdoing. To others, and sometimes even to themselves, it appears that the spiritual life is progressing. But if the practice is subtly misdirected, if it is feeding self-image instead of dissolving self-clinging, then something very painful is happening beneath the surface. Time is being spent, energy is being spent, faith is being spent, and yet the inner machinery of suffering remains intact. This is why the danger is so serious. Human life is rare. To be born with enough clarity to hear teachings, enough stability to practice, enough freedom to reflect, enough sensitivity to care about truth at all. This is not a small thing. In the Buddhist vision, such a life is precious beyond calculation. And yet a wrong practice can consume that precious opportunity little by little, year after year, while leaving the central knots untouched. Imagine watering weeds every morning with perfect consistency, believing they are medicine. The sincerity is real, the effort is real, the schedule is real, but the result is still the strengthening of what should have been uprooted. In the same way, a person can spend years reinforcing the very habits that keep suffering alive. Pride can hide inside discipline. Fear can hide inside obedience. Craving can hide inside visions of attainment. Aversion can hide inside moral rigidity. Delusion can hide inside borrowed certainty. Then practice, instead of exposing the ego, begins protecting it. And once that happens, every good intention gets absorbed into an old pattern. We meditate, but only to escape discomfort. We study, but only to feel superior. We serve, but secretly to be needed. We renounce, but without understanding, so our renunciation becomes bitterness. We speak about compassion, but we do not know how to sit with another person's pain without controlling it. We repeat teachings on emptiness while remaining full of defensiveness. We praise non-attachment while being deeply attached to being seen as spiritual. This is the hidden waste of a wrong path. Not merely wasted hours, but wasted transformation. Not merely lost time on a calendar, but the slow erosion of a rare chance to become free. And the cost is not only philosophical, it is emotional. It settles into the heart in ways that are difficult to describe and painful to admit. At first there may be hope. The person believes, if I continue, peace will come. If I try harder, clarity will come. If I become stricter, purer, more committed, the ache inside will finally disappear. So they continue, they double down, they blame themselves whenever the promised freedom does not arrive. They assume the fault must be insufficient effort, insufficient faith, insufficient surrender, and because they are sincere, they are willing to endure a great deal. But over time, something begins to fracture within them. They may carry guilt for years, not because guilt is helping them awaken, but because they have been taught to mistrust their own honest perception. A part of them knows something is wrong. A part of them senses that the heart is becoming narrower, not wider, harsher, not gentler, more anxious, not more free. Yet they keep going because they fear that questioning the path means failing the path. And so they live in an inner contradiction, outward loyalty, inward unrest. That contradiction is exhausting. It produces confusion that does not always scream. Sometimes it whispers. It is the quiet confusion of not knowing why so much effort yields so little peace. The confusion of hearing beautiful truths, but being unable to embody them. The confusion of speaking about liberation while feeling secretly trapped. The confusion of admiring holiness while becoming afraid of one's own humanity. Then dependence can grow. Instead of becoming more awake, one becomes more reliant on structures, personalities, formulas, and external approval. Rather than learning how to see clearly, one learns how to ask constantly, am I doing it right? Do I still belong? Am I still accepted? Am I pure enough, devoted enough, correct enough? The center of gravity moves further away from direct understanding and deeper into fear-based compliance. This kind of spiritual dependence can look like humility, but often it is a hidden collapse of inner honesty. And when years pass this way, a quiet despair begins visible, not always spoken. Sometimes the person still smiles, still serves, still attends, still quotes profound teachings. But deep down, there is a sadness they cannot name. They were promised peace, but they have become more divided. They were promised freedom, but they feel more constrained. They were promised truth, but they are afraid of sincere questions. They were promised love, but their heart has become tense around imperfection, especially their own. That quiet despair is one of the cruelest costs of practicing wrongly, because it does not only hurt, it confuses the meaning of the Dharma itself. A person may begin to think, perhaps peace is not real. Perhaps awakening is only for others. Perhaps something is fundamentally broken in me. In this way, the wrong path does not simply delay freedom. It can make freedom feel impossible, and suffering rarely stays private. What distorts the heart eventually distorts relationships. A person who is inwardly conflicted often carries that conflict into family life without realizing it. Spiritual ideas become tools of judgment. Teachings that were meant to soften the ego become weapons to measure others. A home that could have been a place of patient understanding becomes a place of subtle pressure, comparison, and spiritual superiority. How many families have been wounded not by open cruelty, but by piety without tenderness apparent, may force forms onto a child without transmitting wisdom. The child is taught to perform reverence before they are taught how to feel safe, seen, and loved. Questions are treated as rebellion. Doubt is treated as impurity. Emotion is treated as weakness. And so the next generation grows up associating the sacred, Not with liberation but with pressure. Not with truth but with fear. Not with love but with control. This is a very deep tragedy, because children learn first through atmosphere, not doctrine. They remember the nervousness in the room, the judgment in the voice, the conditional warmth, the way religion entered the house not as light, but as weight. And later in life, even if they search sincerely for meaning, they may have to spend years untangling the spiritual language that was tied to shame. Communities too can fracture under the influence of wrong practice. When people cling to views without insight, difference becomes threat. Humility disappears, listening weakens, groups divide over form, language, hierarchy, ritual detail, or ideology, while forgetting the basic work of ending greed, hatred, and delusion. People gather in the name of awakening, yet feed competition, gossip, exclusion, and factional identity. The language is holy, but the mind state is worldly. And perhaps most painfully, doctrine can be used to avoid the very work that would make a person more human. Instead of apologizing, someone quotes karma. Instead of grieving, they quote impermanence. Instead of facing trauma, they call it attachment. Instead of taking responsibility for harm, they speak of emptiness. Instead of learning emotional maturity, they hide behind renunciation. None of these teachings are false in themselves. What is false is their use as escape. When doctrine becomes a shield against love, accountability, or vulnerability, it no longer functions as medicine. It becomes a refined way of staying defended. That is why a wrong spiritual path can be more dangerous than ordinary confusion. It can baptize our immaturity and call it wisdom. It can sanctify our avoidance and call it detachment. It can reward our numbness and call it peace. And from a Buddhist perspective, the stakes do not end with this one visible life. This is where many modern minds become uncomfortable, but the principle is profoundly important. In the Dharma, actions matter, intentions matter, views matter, not because some external authority is keeping score, but because each of these shapes consciousness itself. They shape habit, they shape perception, they shape what the mind leans toward, what it repeats, what it becomes capable of noticing, loving, fearing, or refusing. And what is repeated with conviction does not vanish. When circumstances change, it leaves traces, it forms tendencies, it conditions future becoming. So if a person spends years strengthening confusion while believing it is wisdom, strengthening attachment while calling it devotion, strengthening self while preaching selflessness, that pattern does not simply disappear because the body grows old. Cause and effect continue. Momentum continues. View continues. Craving continues. Fear continues. Misunderstanding continues until it is seen clearly and released. This is why the phrase countless lifetimes is not merely dramatic language. It points to scale. It reminds us that spiritual error can have consequences far beyond one disappointed decade or one painful chapter of life. A mistaken path can deepen grooves in the mind that keeps spinning forward. It can delay awakening not by one season, but by long stretches of becoming. If the direction is wrong, effort alone cannot save us. Walking faster in the wrong direction still takes us farther away. This is not meant as a threat. It should not be used to frighten people into obedience. Fear itself can become another distortion. The point is not terror. The point is sobriety. Fire burns whether or not we believe in it. Seeds grow according to their nature. A mind shaped by greed suffers accordingly. A mind shaped by hatred suffers accordingly. A mind shaped by delusion suffers accordingly. This is not punishment, it is lawfulness. And what makes this lawfulness so humbling is that sincerity alone is not enough. One can be sincere and mistaken. One can be devout and misdirected. One can be sacrificial and still be reinforcing bondage. Effort matters greatly, yes, but direction matters just as much. A boat with strong rowers still drifts if its heading is wrong. In spiritual life, this is why right view is so precious. It is not a luxury for philosophers. It is the compass that prevents energy from feeding confusion. So when we say that practicing wrongly can cost us countless lifetimes, we are not trying to shame the seeker or glorify fear. We are trying to protect something sacred, the rare opportunity not only to believe in freedom, but to actually move toward it, to not spend this life decorating the cage, to not spend this life becoming skilled at spiritual performance, while the roots of suffering remain alive, to not hand our confusion to our children as inheritance, to not build communities that speak of awakening while reproducing division, to not carry unexamined views so long that they become destiny. This is why gentle honesty is an act of compassion. To pause and ask, is this path making me more truthful, more humble, more loving, more free, is not betrayal. It is wisdom beginning to breathe. To admit something is not right is not failure. It may be the first real bow to truth. And to feel the full weight of this, we have to understand why spiritual error differs from mistakes in ordinary professions. Consider two farmers standing before the same field. One plants his seeds an inch too shallow. By autumn, the loss is visible, and he corrects the depth the following spring without much sorrow. The other is certain his soil is already rich, so he never questions it at all. Years pass, and only slowly does he notice that nothing beneath the surface has ever truly grown. When people say, if a doctor makes a mistake, one person may die. If a teacher makes a mistake, a generation may suffer. But if we practice wrongly, we may lose countless lifetimes. It can sound severe, almost too severe, but this comparison is not meant to frighten us with dramatic language. It is meant to wake us up to scale, to depth, and to consequence. It asks us to look beyond the surface of harm and see how far a single error can travel when it enters the roots of the mind. A doctor's mistake is tragic because life is precious. One wrong diagnosis, one careless decision, one moment of negligence can end a human life, and everyone feels the weight of that. We understand it immediately because the body is visible. Pain is visible. Death is visible. Families grieve, hearts break, and the cost is undeniable. A teacher's mistake reaches farther. A teacher does not only affect one body but many minds. A teacher can shape how children see themselves, how they think, what they fear, what they dare to become. If a teacher is careless, bitter, dishonest, or deeply confused, that confusion can echo across years. It can weaken confidence, distort values, and quietly enter a whole generation. The damage may not be seen in a single day, but it unfolds through time. One wrong influence can become many wrong choices in many lives. And yet, from a Buddhist perspective, spiritual error reaches into an even deeper layer. Why? Because it does not only affect what we do in this life. It affects the structure of seeing itself. It shapes the mind that interprets experience, forms intention, creates karma, clings, fears, desires, and continues. If the very instrument through which we understand life becomes distorted, then every decision made through that distortion can carry suffering forward again and again. This is where the danger becomes difficult to measure. A bodily death, painful as it is not considered the ultimate catastrophe in Buddhist thought. The body is fragile by nature. It is born, it ages, it falls ill, it dies. No spiritual practice can negotiate a permanent contract with physical life. So the deepest problem is not simply that death comes. The deeper tragedy is that death comes while delusion remains untouched. The body ends, but greed has not been understood. Hatred has not been softened. Ignorance has not been penetrated. Craving still pulls, fear still drives, attachment still binds, and so the momentum continues. That is why the old warning is so piercing. If we practice wrongly, we are not merely wasting time in a hobby. We may be reinforcing the very causes of continued suffering while imagining we are escaping them. We may be decorating bondage and calling it liberation. We may be feeding ego and calling it faith. We may be deepening delusion under the comforting language of wisdom. This is more dangerous than ordinary error because spiritual confusion often feels meaningful. It can feel noble. It can feel disciplined. A person may spend years praying, studying, meditating, teaching, serving, and sacrificing, while the hidden engine underneath remains the same: me, my image, my purity, my position, my specialness, my certainty. Outwardly, it can look like religion. Inwardly, it may still be attachment wearing sacred clothing. And when that happens, the mistake does not stay contained. It changes perception. It becomes a lens. If the lens is clear, then even difficulty can teach wisdom. Even pain can open compassion. Even loss can deepen letting go. But if the lens is warped, then everything that passes through it becomes distorted. Correction feels like attack. Humility feels like weakness. Questions feel like disloyalty. Compassion becomes selective. Truth becomes whatever protects identity. In that state, the person does not simply make one wrong decision. They make many decisions from the same confusion, and each one strengthens the pattern. This is why mistaken self-practice can be so devastating. A person may believe they are becoming more spiritual, while actually becoming more rigid. They may think they are cultivating detachment, while really numbing the heart. They may think they are building faith, while becoming dependent on authority. They may think they are transcending the ego, while secretly feeding a more refined and dangerous form of ego. The ego that believes it has no ego. And because they interpret all experience through that false understanding, the suffering multiplies in ways they cannot see. What makes this even more serious is that the mind does not die with a simple full stop in Buddhist understanding. Habit, intention, clinging, and karmic momentum do not vanish just because the body falls away. If greed, hatred, and delusion are still active, then they continue shaping becoming. So the real danger is not merely, I spent 10 years on the wrong path. The danger is, I spent 10 years strengthening the mental habits that keep me circling. The consequences are not measured only in calendar years. They are measured in continuity. And this continuity matters because what is repeated becomes familiar, and what is familiar begins to feel true. A person can sit inside confusion for so long that confusion becomes home. They can inherit false views, practice them sincerely, defend them passionately, and then transmit them confidently. Once that happens, spiritual error is no longer just an individual problem. It becomes a living current that moves through relationships and communities. This is why one practitioner's confusion can extend far beyond one practitioner. A mother who mistakes fear for piety may pass fear to her children. A father who mistakes control for guidance may raise a family that obeys externally but suffers inwardly. A friend who confuses fanaticism with commitment may pressure others into imitation. A community leader who mistakes charisma for realization may gather followers around personality instead of truth. A teacher who has never examined their own motives may train students to copy form while missing freedom. And the replication can be subtle. Not everyone spreads harm by openly teaching false doctrine. Sometimes the transmission happens through tone, through example, through emotional atmosphere. Children watch how adults use religion when they are hurt, angry, insecure, or proud. Students notice whether spiritual language makes a person kinder or harsher. Friends feel whether practice opens the heart or closes it. Even without formal teaching, confusion leaks. It enters gestures, responses, priorities, and silence. That is why spiritual mistakes can outgrow the individual so quickly. One misled person may influence a spouse, then children, then friends, then students, then an entire small circle that repeats the same misunderstanding as if it were wisdom. Over time, the error gains age, and age gives it credibility. This is how our family believes. This is what our group has always taught. This is what my teacher said. And once a view becomes wrapped in loyalty and tradition, it becomes harder to question even when suffering is increasing. But we must be careful here. If we hear this only as an accusation, we will miss its tenderness. Many who mislead others did not begin with evil intent. Many were first misled themselves. They inherited incomplete teachings. They were shaped by wounded teachers. They were rewarded for performance instead of honesty. They were taught to fear doubt rather than investigate it. They were praised for devotion, while their confusion went unexamined. Some of them are not malicious. Some are simply sincere and mistaken. Some are wounded and passing on the wound in the language they were given. This is important because without compassion, this whole conversation becomes self-righteous. We start dividing the world into deceivers and the deceived, the pure and the corrupt, the awakened and the blind. But that itself is another trap. The truth is more intimate and more humbling. Under the right conditions, any of us can cling to a false path. Any of us can confuse intensity for clarity. Any of us can become loyal to what is familiar, even when it no longer frees the heart. Any of us can defend a harmful pattern because admitting error feels too painful. So this warning is not an invitation to judge others from a distance. It is an invitation to tremble honestly before reality, to say, because the stakes are so high, I must become more careful, not more arrogant, more sincere, not more dramatic, more examinable, not more defensive. The point is not to become suspicious of all teachings or cynical about all teachers. The point is to understand that when the mind is led wrongly, the consequences unfold at the level where future suffering is made. Think of it this way. If someone teaches you an incorrect recipe, dinner is ruined. If someone teaches you an incorrect method for building, the house may crack. But if someone teaches you a distorted way of relating to desire, fear, selfhood, and reality, that teaching enters the core machinery of your life. It affects how you love, how you choose, how you suffer, how you react, how you hope, what you cling to, what you worship, and what you become. It does not stay in the meditation hall or at the altar. It follows you into marriage, work, parenting, grief, success, loneliness, illness, aging, and death. And perhaps most sobering of all, spiritual error often hides itself from correction by borrowing the language of the sacred. The ego can survive criticism in ordinary life, but in spiritual life it can become even more protected. It says, "My path is superior. My teacher must be right. My feelings are proof. My certainty is faith. My emotional intensity is realization. My belonging means I am safe." When confusion is blessed, ritualized, and repeated, it becomes very difficult to detect. The prison begins to look holy. This is why the warning says countless lifetimes, not as poetry alone, but as diagnosis. Because if the wrong view strengthens craving, strengthens aversion, strengthens delusion, strengthens identity, and weakens direct seeing, then it is feeding exactly what binds beings to continued suffering. And if that view is shared, admired, and transmitted, then the consequences ripple outward in ways no one can fully calculate. Still, there is hope in seeing this clearly. The fact that the danger is great does not mean we are doomed. It means we must stop being casual about what shapes the heart. It means sincerity is not enough by itself. Sincerity must be joined with discernment. Good intention is beautiful, but good intention without wisdom can still walk in circles for a very long time. We need humility strong enough to question what we have trusted. We need honesty deep enough to notice when practice is making us smaller instead of freer. We need courage soft enough to admit, I may have learned this wrongly. I may have been repeating what was never carefully examined. That admission is painful, but it is merciful. Because the moment we understand how serious misdirection can be, another question rises naturally, urgently, almost like a cry from the heart. If the danger is this great, if the mind can be shaped so deeply for harm or for freedom, then how do we know whether we are walking toward truth or away from it? How can we recognize that we are on the wrong road? The first thing to understand is this. The wrong direction is not always loud. It does not always announce itself through scandal, collapse, or some obvious fall from grace. Very often it moves quietly. It hides inside familiar routines, disciplined habits, even sincere devotion. A person can look religious, sound wise, appear committed, and still be moving farther and farther away from freedom in the deepest sense. That is why self-examination is so necessary. Not self-hatred, not panic, not endless suspicion of oneself, but honest looking. If we truly want to know whether our practice is healthy, we have to stop asking only, "How much am I doing?" and begin asking, "What is this doing to my heart?" That question changes everything, because the measure of spiritual life is not how impressive it appears from the outside. It is not how many teachings we can quote, how many rituals we can complete, how long we can sit, how austere we can seem, or how much admiration we receive from others. The real question is much more intimate. After all this practice, am I becoming more humble or more proud, more open or more rigid, more gentle or more harsh, more free or more afraid? One of the clearest inward signs that we may be walking in the wrong direction is that pride begins to grow faster than humility. This pride may not look crude. It may not say, "I am better than everyone." Sometimes it appears in much subtler forms. It appears when we secretly feel superior, because we meditate and others do not. It appears when we think our understanding is deeper, our path is purer, our discipline is stronger, our view is more correct. It appears when we stop listening, because inwardly we have already decided that we know. Real practice softens the need to elevate oneself. It makes a person simpler, quieter, less interested in comparison. But when practice becomes fuel for identity, the ego does not disappear. It becomes spiritualized. And that is often more dangerous, because now pride feels sacred. Another sign is that fear increases instead of freedom. True practice should gradually loosen fear's grip, not by removing all difficulty from life, but by changing our relationship to it. We become less terrified of loss, less panicked by uncertainty, less enslaved by praise and blame. But if our path makes us more anxious, more superstitious, more afraid of making one wrong move, more dependent on formulas for safety, then something is off. If spirituality becomes a system of nervous self-protection, if we feel constantly threatened by invisible punishment, if we obey from fear but never flower into understanding, then the heart is not being liberated. It is being conditioned into another prison. There is also the sign of performance replacing sincerity. This happens so easily that many people do not notice it. We begin practice to become honest, but slowly we start trying to look like a spiritual person. We learn the right words, the right expressions, the right tone of humility, the right posture of compassion. We know when to appear detached, when to appear deep, when to appear calm. Yet inside, we may still be restless, resentful, hungry for recognition. A path becomes dangerous when image matters more than truth. The moment appearing awakened becomes more important than being truthful about our confusion. We have already begun to drift. Sincerity is willing to be seen as unfinished. Performance needs to be seen as advanced. And then there is attachment to being right. This is a very painful sign because it often dresses itself as commitment to truth. Of course, truth matters. Of course, discernment matters. But there is a difference between loving truth and clinging to one's position. When a person is truly devoted to truth, they remain teachable. They can listen. They can be corrected. They can pause and say, "Let me look again." But when the ego takes hold of the path, the need to be right becomes stronger than the willingness to see clearly. Then every disagreement feels threatening. Every question feels like an insult. Every challenge becomes an enemy. At that point, the person is no longer serving truth. Truth is being used to defend the self. These inward signs eventually show themselves in behavior. They do not remain hidden forever. One of the most revealing places to look is speech. How do we speak when we are disappointed, contradicted, inconvenienced, or hurt. Harsh speech is often a warning light. A person may speak beautifully in formal settings, but if everyday speech is sharp, dismissive, sarcastic, cruel, or humiliating, then the practice has not yet entered the bloodstream of life. Wisdom without kindness in speech is not yet stable wisdom. A heart that is truly being transformed becomes more careful with words, not because it is pretending to be gentle, but because it has begun to see how much suffering words can create. Another behavioral sign is hidden resentment. This is important because many practitioners become skilled at suppressing what they do not want to admit. Outwardly, they may appear peaceful, but inwardly they carry a long list of injuries, comparisons, disappointments, and grudges. They may say, "I have let it go," but their energy hardens whenever a certain person is mentioned. They may speak of compassion, but they are secretly feeding bitterness. Suppression is not freedom. Numbness is not forgiveness. Silence is not always peace. If years of practice have only taught us how to conceal resentment more elegantly, then we need to look again very carefully. Dependence on external approval is another clear sign. If our peace rises and falls according to who praises us, who notices us, who invites us, who validates our efforts, then our center is still outside us. We may believe we are practicing for liberation, but in reality we may be practicing for reassurance. We may want to be seen as devoted, wise, pure, or disciplined. And when that image is not confirmed by others, we feel wounded or empty. This dependence can become very subtle in spiritual communities, because approval may come in refined forms. Not applause, but respect. Not fame, but being considered serious. Not status in the ordinary world, but status in a sacred one. Yet attachment is still attachment even when it wears holy clothing. A relane is contempt for criticism. When someone offers correction, do we become immediately defensive? Do we dismiss the person because they are less educated, less practiced, less respected? Do we search for reasons not to hear what is being said? Sometimes criticism is unfair, yes. Sometimes others project their own confusion onto us. But if we cannot bear being questioned at all, then we are in danger. A path that cannot be examined becomes a shelter for delusion. Humility does not mean believing every accusation. It means remaining open enough to learn, even from discomfort. Sometimes a painful mirror is still a true mirror. Another sign that the path may be distorted is using spirituality to escape ordinary responsibilities. This is more common than people realize. A person may talk about emptiness to avoid apologizing. They may talk about detachment to justify emotional coldness. They may talk about karma to avoid practical action. They may hide in meditation, retreat, study, or noble language, while neglecting family, work, health, commitments, debts, or duties that life has placed in their hands. But genuine practice does not make a person less responsible. It makes them more honest, more grounded, more capable of meeting life without avoidance. Spirituality is not an excuse to disappear from the human responsibilities that test our integrity. And perhaps the most practical examination of all is this. Is the practice reducing greed, anger, and delusion in ordinary moments, not in special moods, not during ceremonies, not when everyone is watching, in ordinary moments? When someone speaks to us unfairly, what happens? When our plans fail, what happens? When desire arises strongly, what happens when we are tired, irritated, hungry, stressed, overlooked, or disappointed? What happens? These are the laboratories of truth. Conflict reveals us, temptation reveals us, fatigue reveals us, frustration reveals us. If we are practicing for years, yet greed remains untouched, anger remains unexamined, and delusion remains deeply cherished, then we must ask with great seriousness what exactly our practice has been doing. Has it made us less reactive in conflict, or merely more skilled at justifying our reactions with spiritual language? Has it helped us meet disappointment with patience, or have we simply become better at pretending not to care while resentment ferments underneath? Has it weakened the pull of temptation? Or have we only redirected our cravings into more socially acceptable forms? Has it brought clarity when we are tired and vulnerable? Or does all our wisdom disappear the moment comfort is threatened? These are not accusations. They are merciful questions. They protect us from wasting years. We should also ask something even more searching. Does the path increase compassion toward difficult people, or does it deepen attachment to our own spiritual image? This question cuts deeply because difficult people are where ideals become real. It is easy to feel kind toward those who support us, admire us, or agree with us. But what about the difficult person, the unfair person, the arrogant person, the selfish person, the person who triggers old wounds, the person who does not change on our schedule? Does our practice help us see their suffering more clearly? Does it help us respond with steadiness, boundaries, and compassion? Or does it simply make us feel more righteous, more separate, more convinced that we are evolved and they are not? A spiritual self-image can become one of the strongest chains of all. Once we become attached to being the calm one, the wise one, the awakened one, the compassionate one, then every situation starts revolving around protecting that identity. We no longer meet life directly. We manage appearances. We avoid admitting anger because anger would stain the image. We avoid admitting confusion because confusion would weaken the image. We avoid admitting jealousy, pettiness, vanity, and hurt because these things do not fit the role we have built. Then the practice is no longer cleansing the heart. It is decorating the mask. This is why rigorous honesty is indispensable. The wrong path is often recognized not through strange visions, dramatic failures, or some shocking external event. More often, it is recognized through the unchanged quality of the heart. After all the chanting, all the study, all the discipline, all the effort, is the heart softer or harder, more spacious or more cramped, more truthful or more performative, more compassionate or more self-concerned, more awake to suffering or more absorbed in identity? The answer may be humbling, but humility here is not defeat. It is the doorway to correction. We do not need to condemn ourselves if we see these signs. Seeing clearly is already grace. It is already intelligence beginning to function. Many people spend years protecting an illusion because they are too ashamed to question it. But shame only prolongs confusion. What helps? Gentle courage, clean courage, the courage to stop pretending, the courage to admit, something in me has been going in the wrong direction, the courage to say, my practice may have strengthened certain wholesome habits, but it has also protected some deep forms of ego. That kind of honesty is painful, yes, but it is alive, and what is alive can change. Recognition matters, but recognition alone does not free anyone unless it is followed by the courage to correct course. And that correction is often the hardest moment of all. Because it is one thing to notice that something is off. It is another thing entirely to admit that what is off may not be a small detail, not just a minor imbalance, not just a temporary detour, but the very direction we have trusted for years. That realization can shake a human being to the core. It does not only challenge a method. It touches identity, it touches memory, it touches loyalty, it touches all the sacrifices we made in the name of what we believed was holy, good, and true. Many people can endure physical hardship more easily than they can endure the pain of seeing that they were sincerely wrong. We can fast. We can wake early. We can bow until our body aches. We can give money, time, reputation, and years of our life. But to stand still and whisper, I may have misunderstood the path itself. That requires a different kind of strength. It feels like the ground moving under our feet. Why is it so painful? Because we do not practice in an emotional vacuum. We build our lives around what we believe. We join communities. We make promises. We shape friendships. We define ourselves. We become the devoted one. the disciplined one, the loyal one, the one who knows. Over time, practice is no longer just something we do. It becomes part of who we think we are, and once identity hardens around a path, questioning the path can feel like erasing the self. This is why some people would rather defend an error than face the grief of letting it go, not because they are evil, not because they are stupid, but because the heart is afraid of shame, afraid of embarrassment, afraid that others will say, "How could you not see this sooner?" Afraid that family, students, friends, or fellow practitioners will judge them. Afraid that if they step away, they will lose belonging. Afraid that if they question what they trusted, everything else in life will become uncertain too. And beneath those fears there is often another sorrow that is even quieter and even heavier. The fear of wasted years, the fear of looking back and feeling that so much effort was poured into confusion, so much sincerity, so much longing, so much devotion. We imagine all those mornings, all those prayers, tears, all those acts of obedience, and a cry rises in the heart. Was it all for nothing? That question can break a person open. But this is where we need tenderness, because the answer is not always simple. Even on a mistaken path, some sincerity may have been real. Some discipline may have strengthened the mind. Some suffering may have deepened compassion. Some prayers may have purified intention. Human life is rarely black and white. Yet even if some goodness was present, we still have to face the central truth. If the direction is wrong, then continuing in that direction does not redeem the past. It only multiplies the cost. This is why pride is so dangerous in spiritual life. Pride can wear religious clothing. Pride can sound devout. Pride can quote scriptures. Pride can kneel and chant and still refuse truth. Pride would rather preserve an image than be healed, it says. I have already come too far to turn back. But that is precisely when turning back becomes urgent. If you discover you have been walking toward a cliff, the worst response is not to stop because you have already walked so many miles. A mistaken path abandoned in honesty is not a tragedy, it is mercy. The real tragedy is a mistaken path defended for another 10 years, another 20 years, another lifetime, simply because the ego cannot bear to bow. There is a kind of repentance that people misunderstand. They think repentance means humiliation, self-hatred, collapse, or endless guilt. They imagine that to admit error is to destroy themselves. But true repentance is much cleaner than that. It is not theatrical misery. It is not punishing ourselves so we can feel morally dramatic. It is not standing in front of the ruins of our illusion and stabbing ourselves with regret. True repentance is the moment we stop arguing with reality. It is the moment we stop protecting what is false. It is the moment the heart says with simplicity, "Yes, I see it now. I was mistaken, let me not continue." That is not weakness. That is dignity, in fact. Some of the strongest moments in a human life are not the moments of certainty, but the moments of honest reversal. The moment a person says, "I cannot keep pretending." The moment someone releases a cherished self-image because truth matters more than appearance. The moment a practitioner chooses sincerity over status, clarity over comfort, awakening over approval. That is strength of a very high order. Quiet strength, sacred strength. And yet, let us be honest, even after we see the error, something in us may still want to bargain. We may say, perhaps I can keep part of the image and still change. Perhaps I can adjust outwardly without admitting inwardly. Perhaps I can remain admired and still be transformed. But real transformation usually asks for more than cosmetic change. It asks for humility. Not humiliation, but humility, the willingness to be small enough to learn again. Humility is painful to the ego because it strips away the fantasy that we were always right, always pure, always advanced, always in control. But humility is a blessing to the soul because it returns us to reality. And reality, however sharp at first, is kinder than delusion. Delusion comforts us while it poisons us. Reality may sting, but it can heal. There are people who stay trapped not because they have no intelligence, but because they cannot bear disillusionment. They cannot bear the collapse of the story they told themselves. They need to feel chosen, elevated, secure, spiritually special. So they keep defending a structure that no longer has life in it. They keep repeating words that no longer touch the heart. They keep performing certainty while inwardly drying out. This is one of the saddest forms of suffering, because from the outside it may still look disciplined, even admirable, but inside truth is being traded for image. Awakening often begins exactly where the image starts to crack. Not where we feel glorious, not where we feel spiritually impressive, not where everyone praises our devotion, but where something false can no longer be maintained, where the heart grows tired of its own performances, where the soul becomes weary of defending a version of self that is no longer honest. In that weary, disillusioned place, something precious can happen. We may stop asking, "How do I preserve what I have built?" and begin asking, "What is actually true?" That question changes everything, because once truth becomes more important than comfort, the path can begin again. Not from pride, but from sincerity. Not from borrowed certainty, but from direct seeing. Not from the need to look advanced, but from the willingness to be taught. This is why disillusionment, painful as it is, can be a holy threshold. The breaking of illusion is not the breaking of the soul. Sometimes it is the first time the soul can finally breathe. Still, we must be careful here. When people realize they were mistaken, they often swing from self-protection into self-attack. At first, they defend themselves. Then, when the defense collapses, they condemn themselves. They say, "I was a fool. I ruined everything. I am hopeless. I cannot trust myself at all." But self-condemnation is not clarity. It is just the ego changing costumes. Before, it wanted to feel superior. Now it wants to feel uniquely terrible. Both forms are self-absorption. The point is not to hate ourselves. The point is to stop lying to ourselves. There is a world of difference between guilt that paralyzes and responsibility that awakens. Paralyzing guilt keeps circling around the self. It says how awful I am, how terrible I am, how broken I am, and it never moves beyond that. But responsibility is cleaner. It says, yes, this was mistaken, yes, there were consequences. Yes, I must learn, repair, and change. Responsibility faces truth without collapsing into self-drama. It has sobriety. It has backbone. It has movement. This matters deeply in spiritual life, because if every mistake becomes an excuse for self-hatred, then honesty will feel too dangerous. We will keep avoiding the truth because we cannot bear what we think the truth will do to us. But when we understand that seeing clearly is not a death sentence, that admitting error is not the end of dignity, then honesty becomes possible, then repentance becomes livable, then correction becomes an act of love. Love, in this case, does not mean indulgence. It means refusing to abandon ourselves to falsehood any longer. It means caring enough about liberation that we are willing to lose our illusions. It means respecting truth more than reputation. It means saying, I do not need to preserve the story that makes me feel safe. I need to know what is real. And perhaps that is one of the most mature prayers a person can ever offer. Not let me be praised for my devotion. Not let me feel spiritually important, but let me not deceive myself. Even if truth humbles me, let it free me. When that prayer becomes sincere, something softens. The heart no longer needs to win. It no longer needs to appear flawless. It no longer needs to defend every past choice. It becomes teachable. And a teachable heart is a living heart. A living heart can turn. A living heart can bow. A living heart can begin again without bitterness. So if you are seeing now that parts of your practice, your understanding, your motivations, or your spiritual identity were mixed with confusion, do not make the mistake of turning that discovery into despair. Let it become honesty. Let it become simplicity. Let it become the end of pretense. You do not need to crush yourself beneath the weight of what you did not know, but you do need to stop protecting what you now see. There is no shame in waking up. The shame, if we must use that word at all, is only in refusing to wake up because our pride is too expensive to surrender. The path becomes real the moment truth becomes more precious than image. And once humility opens that door, the next question naturally arises. If wrong practice can look convincing for so long, then what does right practice actually look like? Then we must begin where the Buddha always began. Not with performance, not with identity, not with mystical excitement, but with seeing clearly. True practice begins with right view. And right view is not a slogan we memorize to sound wise. It is a deep correction in the way we look at life, at suffering, at ourselves, and at what we think spiritual life is for. To begin with right view means we stop negotiating with reality. We stop asking the path to flatter us. We stop trying to use Dharma to preserve the very confusion that is making us suffer. We begin by admitting something simple and difficult. This human life, as it is usually lived, is unstable. Everything we cling to changes. Everything we build our identity around fades. Health falters, relationships transform. Praise disappears, certainty cracks. Even the version of ourselves we defended so fiercely last year may already be dissolving. This is not pessimism, it is honesty. And honesty is mercy. Because if we do not see impermanence clearly, we will keep investing our whole heart in what cannot hold us. We will demand permanence from the changing. We will ask the world to promise what it was never designed to promise. Then when life behaves like life, we call it betrayal. But true practice begins when we understand that suffering is not only in pain itself. Suffering is also in our refusal to understand the nature of things. Right view means we dare to look directly at dukkha, the unsatisfactoriness woven into conditioned life, not to become gloomy, not to become detached in a cold way, but to stop being naive. So long as we imagine that enough success, enough admiration, enough comfort, enough spiritual experiences, enough control will finally make the heart permanently secure, we remain asleep inside the dream. Practice begins when we see that what we call my problem is often much larger than a single event. It is the whole mechanism of craving, resisting, clinging, fearing, becoming. And with that comes another essential seeing. Cause and effect. Our inner and outer lives do not arise randomly. Thoughts shape speech. Speech shapes relationship. Repeated actions shape character. Intention leaves traces. What we feed grows. What we rehearse becomes familiar. What we excuse becomes a habit. Karma is not merely some distant cosmic bookkeeping system waiting for the next lifetime. Karma is happening now. Every time anger is justified and indulged, the mind is trained. Every time envy is fed in secret, the heart is narrowed. Every time truth is bent to protect ego, confusion deepens. And every time kindness is chosen over retaliation, restraint over impulse, honesty over image, something bright is strengthened. This is why true practice cannot be reduced to appearance. It is not decoration. It is transformation. It is not adding a spiritual style on top of an unchanged mind. It is not learning sacred language while continuing to live in resentment, vanity, dishonesty, and self-deception. A room is not purified because incense is burning in it. A heart is not liberated because it has learned how to speak about liberation. Right view knows the difference. If liberation is real, then something in us must actually change. Not superficially, not temporarily, not only when others are watching. We must become less ruled by greed, less ruled by aversion, less ruled by delusion. We must become more capable of truth, of steadiness, of compassion, of renunciation, of presence. Without this, spiritual life becomes theater, beautiful, moving, convincing theater perhaps, but still theater. So real practice must enter the ordinary. It must touch how we live when no one is impressed. It must shape our conduct. This is why the path is grounded in ethical life. Ethics are not a moral accessory to meditation. They are the ground that makes meditation honest. If our words are careless, if our actions are harmful, if our desires are constantly indulged without examination, then the mind we bring to the cushion is already agitated, already compromised, already split against itself. To live ethically means something very concrete. It means speaking truthfully, not only avoiding dramatic lies, but also noticing exaggeration, manipulation, strategic silence, and the subtle ways we use language to manage how others see us. It means practicing restraint, which is so unfashionable in a world that worships impulse. Restraint does not mean suppression born from fear. It means enough wisdom to pause before acting out every emotion and obeying every desire. It means non-harm, not as an abstract ideal, but as a moment-by-moment sensitivity to how our thoughts, words, choices, consumption, and reactions affect other beings. It also means responsibility. A serious practitioner does not use emptiness to escape accountability, does not use compassion to avoid boundaries, does not use everything is karma as a way to become indifferent to suffering. Real practice makes a person more responsible, not less, more careful, not more careless, more trustworthy, not more slippery. And this ethical life is built in ordinary actions, not dramatic ones. Karma is created in the small places we often ignore, in the tone we use with a tired family member, in whether we speak harshly when irritated, in whether we take what is not freely given, even in subtle ways, in whether we consume media that inflames greed and comparison, in whether we honor commitments, in whether we turn away from another's pain because it is inconvenient, in whether we justify cruelty because we are hurt. The unseen moments are not secondary to practice. They are where practice becomes real. Many people want advanced teachings while neglecting basic conduct. But without ethical clarity, higher teachings are easily misused by an untrained ego. The more intelligence a person has, the more beautifully they can rationalize their confusion. So before asking, how high is this teaching, we may need to ask, does this path make me more honest, more gentle, less dangerous to myself and others? If not, something essential is missing from here. True practice moves into direct observation, not merely believing the teachings, but seeing the mind as it moves. This is where the path becomes intimate. We stop being fascinated only by outer events and begin studying the machinery within. We notice what happens in real time. A word is heard, and irritation rises. Someone else succeeds, and comparison appears. A desire is blocked, and frustration hardens. Praise arrives, and self-image expands. Criticism comes, and the body contracts around me. Fear whispers, and the mind begins building futures that do not exist. This watching is not harsh. It is not self-hatred dressed as mindfulness. It is patient, precise, unromantic observation. We learn to sing when it first stirs, not only after it has taken over. We learn to recognize aversion before it becomes speech or action. We learn to feel pride forming, that subtle intoxication that wants to be superior, correct, admired, spiritually special. We learn to catch fear as sensation, story, momentum. We begin to notice self-making itself, the constant construction of I, me, and mine around passing experiences. This is profound because most of suffering is not only in what we feel, but in how quickly we turn feeling into identity. Anger comes, and instead of knowing anger is present, we become the angry one. Sadness comes, and instead of gently holding it, we become a story about our brokenness. Desire comes, and instead of watching its movement, we become its servant. True practice interrupts this trance. It creates space. And in that space, wisdom can begin. To observe the mind in this way is demanding because it removes our favorite excuse, unconsciousness. Once you start seeing clearly, you cannot pretend in the same way. You begin to notice how often suffering is intensified by repetition, by narrative, by clinging, by the insistence that reality should obey preference. And you also begin to discover something hopeful. Not every impulse must be followed. Not every thought deserves belief. Not every emotion must become action. Awareness introduces freedom right in the middle of old conditioning. But awareness alone is not enough if it becomes dry, proud, or merely technical. True practice must soften the heart. Compassion and humility are not decorations placed on top of wisdom after the real work is done. They are evidence that the work is genuine. If a person studies deeply, meditates diligently, speaks brilliantly about emptiness and non-self, yet becomes colder, harsher, more arrogant, more impatient with ordinary people, then something has gone wrong. Wisdom that does not make the heart more tender is incomplete wisdom. Compassion in practice means we begin to understand suffering from the inside. Because we are watching our own mind honestly, we stop being shocked by human weakness. We see how craving burns, how fear distorts, how pride isolates, how hurt becomes aggression. Then when we see others caught in these same fires, the response is less condemnation and more care. Not permissiveness, not blindness, but care. A recognition that all beings, in one form or another, are struggling under causes and conditions they often barely understand. Humility grows in the same soil. The more clearly we see the mind, the less reason we have to feel superior. We notice how unstable our own virtue can be, how quickly delusion can return, how often self-interest disguises itself as principle. This kind of humility is healthy. It does not say, I am worthless. It says, I must remain careful. I am still learning. I am not beyond confusion. And this humility protects practice from becoming another weapon of ego. In fact, one of the quiet signs of progress is not that we feel more spiritually important. It is that we become more teachable, more honest about our motives, more willing to apologize, more willing to listen, less eager to dominate every conversation with certainty. A mature practitioner usually becomes simpler. There is, despite, less hunger to be recognized as advanced, less emotional advertising of one's depth. The path begins to show itself in steadiness, in kindness, in reliability, in the ability to remain awake during small frustrations and ordinary disappointments. This is why real practice is often less dramatic than fantasy. There may be moments of insight, peace, beauty, and deep stillness, yes, but much of the path is quieter than people expect. It is choosing not to lie when lying would be convenient. It is staying present with discomfort instead of immediately escaping into distraction. It is noticing resentment and not feeding it all night. It is admitting fault before the ego has finished building its defense. It is remaining gentle when tired. It is remembering impermanence in the middle of praise. It is remembering cause and effect in the middle of temptation. It is watching the mind in the exact moment it wants to become somebody. And at the same time, real practice is more demanding than performance. Performance can be turned on when needed. Real practice asks for change in hidden moments. Performance wants witnesses. Practice asks, who are you when no one knows? Performance seeks impression. Practice seeks freedom. Performance can survive on language. Practice requires sacrifice. It asks us to give up cherished habits, cherished identities, cherished resentments, cherished illusions. It asks us to let truth rearrange us. That is why authentic practice can feel plain from the outside and revolutionary from within. The drama is not always visible. The battle is often silent. A person may appear to be doing nothing remarkable, while inwardly they are refusing anger, releasing pride, enduring uncertainty without panic, and choosing compassion over self-protection. This is sacred work, even if no one applauds it. So if we ask what true practice begins with, the answer is both simple and lifelong. It begins with seeing clearly. It deepens through ethical living. It matures through careful observation of the mind. It proves itself through compassion and humility. And it continues in the ordinary moments where character is actually formed and karma is actually shaped. This path is not glamorous, but it is real. It does not ask us to become exotic. It asks us to become honest. It does not ask us to appear awakened. It asks us to stop feeding what keeps us asleep. And because of that, it is both deeply accessible and profoundly challenging. Anyone can begin, but no one can fake the fruit forever. Yet even with a better understanding, another question remains. How do we stay steady in a world full of confusion? One of the deepest answers is this. We do not stay steady alone, but we also do not stay steady by handing our inner life over to someone else. On a spiritual path, guidance matters. It matters because the mind is subtle. It can deceive itself with great intelligence. It can turn craving into devotion, fear into discipline, and pride into certainty. Left completely on our own, many of us will wander in circles while believing we are moving forward. So yes, teachers matter, communities matter, good friends on the path matter. A wise voice can save us years of confusion. A healthy community can protect us when our energy is weak. A true teacher can point out the places where the ego hides behind beautiful language. But there is a danger here that is as old as religion itself. The moment we realize we need help, we may become willing to surrender more than confusion. We may surrender discernment. We may begin to believe that reverence means obedience, that humility means never questioning, that trust means switching off the very clarity the path is supposed to awaken. And when that happens, we are no longer practicing freedom. We are practicing dependence while calling it faith. This is why choosing guidance is not a minor issue. It is not a side concern. It is part of practice itself. If the road is long, then who we walk with matters. If the mind is easily influenced, then what we repeatedly hear matters. If our heart is vulnerable, then where we place our trust matters more than we often admit. A doctor's mistake may harm one body. A teacher's mistake may shape one generation. But when spiritual guidance goes wrong, the cost can sink deep into consciousness itself. A person can spend years strengthening illusion while believing they are transcending it. That is why this requires tenderness and seriousness at the same time. We should begin with balance. It is immature to say, I need no teacher, no community, no instruction. That often sounds strong, but underneath it may be hidden arrogance, fear of correction, or attachment to self-direction. Yet it is equally immature to say, I will let another human being think for me, interpret reality for me, and define truth for me. That too is fear, only in another form. The middle way is more honest. We need guidance, but we must remain awake within that guidance. We receive instruction, but we continue to observe. We listen deeply, but we do not abandon conscience. We respect experience, but we do not worship personality. A trustworthy teacher does not ask you to become smaller in your humanity. They help you become more truthful, more responsible, more compassionate, more inwardly stable. Their presence may be strong, but it does not suffocate your intelligence. Their words may challenge you, but they do not train you to betray what is wholesome and clear. They do not make you feel that your only access to truth is through their approval. Instead, they return you again and again to practice. They point you back to your own conduct, your own mind, your own honesty, your own effort. This is one of the clearest signs of healthy guidance. It leads you back to the path, not into captivity around a person. It does not feed a culture where the teacher becomes the center of everyone's emotional gravity. It does not quietly replace awakening with admiration. A real guide may be respected, even deeply loved, but the teaching does not end in the teacher. It opens into ethical living, clear seeing, restraint, compassion, and freedom from clinging. If everything keeps bending back toward the greatness of one personality, something has already gone off course. Ethical consistency is another essential marker, not perfection, because no embodied human being performs life without flaw, but consistency. Does this person speak about truthfulness and also practice truthfulness? Do they speak about greed while living with some restraint? Do they teach compassion while humiliating others? Do they praise humility while requiring special treatment? Spiritual language is easy, conduct is harder, and when conduct repeatedly contradicts teaching, we should not explain it away in the name of mystery. Many people have been harmed because they were taught to reinterpret obvious contradictions as signs of higher wisdom. But confusion dressed in sacred language is still confusion. Humility matters deeply here. A trustworthy guide does not need to appear all-knowing. They are able to say, "I do not know." They are able to be corrected in practical matters. They do not make themselves unreachable through spiritual prestige. They do not build identity out of superiority. There is a quietness in genuine depth. Even when such a person speaks firmly, there is no hunger to dominate. They are not intoxicated by influence. They understand that authority in spiritual life is dangerous unless it is continually purified by self-awareness and accountability. Patience is another sign often overlooked. False guidance frequently creates urgency that bypasses wisdom. It says, "Surrender now, commit now, pay now, obey now, or you will miss your chance, lose your blessing, fall into darkness." But truth is not usually threatened by careful examination. A wholesome teacher can wait. They do not panic when sincere questions arise. They do not interpret every hesitation as betrayal. They understand that trust ripens. They know that forcing spiritual intimacy often produces dependency, not liberation. Clarity also matters. Not the kind of clever clarity that dazzles the intellect, but the kind that helps a person live better, see more honestly, and practice more sincerely. After listening, are you more grounded or more confused? More responsible or more inflated? More attentive to cause and effect, or more addicted to grand ideas about yourself? True teaching may be profound, but over time it simplifies the heart. It helps you distinguish wholesome from unwholesome, truth from self-deception, compassion from sentimentality, renunciation from performance. It does not keep you in a fog where only the teacher can interpret your experience. And compassion must be real, not theatrical. Some people can speak softly and still be manipulative. Some can appear kind while quietly controlling others through emotional pressure. Real compassion does not erase boundaries, morality, or truthfulness. It does not use your delusion to keep you attached. It does not use your wounds as an entry point for domination. It has warmth, yes, but also integrity. It wants your freedom, not your usefulness. There are warning signs we must learn to recognize without guilt. One of the strongest is manipulation through fear. If a teacher or community keeps people obedient by suggesting that questioning will bring spiritual ruin, karmic disaster, loss of protection, or exclusion from truth, then fear has taken the seat of wisdom. Another danger is financial exploitation. Support for a teaching, a temple, or a community can be wholesome. Generosity is a beautiful part of spiritual life. But when money becomes tangled with guilt, status, access, or coercion, something has become corrupted. If devotion is measured by payment, we should become very careful. Exaggerated claims are another red flag. When every story becomes miraculous, when every ordinary insight is advertised as enlightenment, when a teacher's power is presented as beyond ordinary moral standards, discernment is already being weakened. Why? Because exaggeration is not just about image. It prepares the mind to stop examining. It creates an atmosphere where people feel small and suggestible. Once people are conditioned to believe that a figure is extraordinary in every way, they may ignore harm they would clearly recognize anywhere else. The demand for unquestioning loyalty is especially dangerous. No healthy path asks us to abandon moral intelligence. Respect is not slavery. Devotion is not blindness. Gratitude is not the suspension of truth. If leaving is treated as betrayal, if asking sincere questions is treated as aggression, if concern is labeled ego whenever it challenges authority, then the system is protecting itself, not protecting practice. A path that cannot bear examination is already unstable. We also need to watch for teachings that inflate the ego while pretending to transcend it. This can happen in obvious ways, through promises of special status, secret powers, cosmic rank, or spiritual superiority over ordinary people. But it can also happen in subtle ways, where students are constantly encouraged to feel chosen, more advanced, more pure, more awake than others. The ego loves sacred costumes. It will wear simplicity, renunciation, even emptiness. If those things can become identity, a trustworthy teaching steadily undermines vanity. It does not secretly feed it. And perhaps the most serious warning is any teaching that bypasses morality. Whenever someone implies that awakening makes ethics optional, that realization excuses harm, that intention matters so much that conduct no longer matters, a very old trap has appeared. We should remember this clearly. A teaching that asks us to step over honesty, restraint, non-harming, or responsibility in the name of higher truth is not lifting us upward. It is pulling us into spiritual confusion with philosophical decoration. The safest measure is not charisma, it is fruit, not the intensity of a gathering, not the beauty of a voice, not the force of a presence, not the number of followers, not the emotional experience of being near someone. The question is more sober than that. Over time, does this teach reduce greed, hatred, and delusion? Does it help people become more truthful, more stable, more compassionate, more capable of admitting fault? Are students becoming kinder in their homes, more responsible in speech, less imprisoned by ego, less reactive, less self-deceived? Or are they becoming defensive, dependent, inflated, morally confused, and unable to think without permission? Words can seduce. Lived fruit reveals. A person may speak beautifully about surrender, but do their students become more free or more afraid? A community may use the language of love, but do people become more honest or more performative? A teacher may speak of emptiness, but do they embody simplicity or demand constant attention? The path must be tested in life. If the teaching is true, it should appear not only in ceremonies and conversations, but in relationships, in money, in conflict, in correction, in disappointment, in ordinary service, in the way people treat those who can offer them nothing. We should also admit something more uncomfortable. Not every harmful environment is built by malicious people. Sometimes sincere communities normalize confusion slowly. Habits are inherited. Distortions get passed down with good intentions. People repeat what they receive because it is familiar, not because it is wise. A whole group can become used to unhealthy patterns simply because no one wants to create discomfort by asking honest questions. Silence begins to look like harmony. Conformity begins to look like unity. And over time, the community loses the very vitality that truth requires. That is why discernment is not rebellion. It is care. It is not cynicism. It is responsibility. To question respectfully is not to destroy what is sacred. Sometimes it is how we protect it. Sometimes the most faithful act is to refuse confusion. Even when confusion has become traditional, we do not honor the Dharma by pretending not to see what we see. We honor it by loving truth more than comfort, more than image, more than belonging. If you are walking this path, do not rush to distrust everyone, but do not rush to trust in ways that make you inwardly blind. Let respect grow slowly. Watch how people live. Watch respond to criticism. Watch whether they become gentler or harder as authority increases. Watch whether their teaching returns you to conscience, practice, and humility. And watch your own mind too, because sometimes what binds us to unhealthy guidance is not only the teacher's flaw, but our hunger to be rescued, special, certain, or carried. A good guide is a blessing, a wholesome community is a refuge, but neither can replace the clear, patient work of seeing for yourself. In the end, no one can swallow medicine on your behalf. No one can purify your intention for you. No one can walk inside your choices and live their consequences for you. Guidance can illuminate the path. It cannot replace awakening with attachment. So receive help, but stay awake. Bow if bowing helps soften pride, but never bow so low that you lose your conscience. Learn from those who have walked farther, but do not offer your discernment as the price of belonging. The path is too precious for that. The stakes are too high for that. If we practice wrongly, we do not merely lose time. We deepen patterns that can follow us far beyond one season, one disappointment, one life arrangement. That is why care in choosing guidance is not fearfulness. It is wisdom joined with love. And because confusion often hides in the ordinary, we now return from teachers and temples to the place where real practice is tested every day. Consider the monk who could sit through a 3-day retreat in perfect stillness, breath unshaken, back straight, mind seemingly at peace the entire time. Yet when a novice spilled his tea by accident on the final morning, sharp words escaped before thought could catch them. The retreat had tested his posture. The spilled tea tested his heart. It is tested at home, in the kitchen, when you are tired and someone speaks to you in the wrong tone. It is tested at work, when your effort is overlooked and another person receives the praise you secretly hoped for. It is tested in traffic, when a stranger's impatience meets your own and, for one sharp moment, the mind wants to strike back. It is tested when the bills come, when plans fail, when the body changes, when your parents grow older and need from you what they once gave without asking. It is tested when love is not returned in the form you expected, when children do not listen, when friends misunderstand you, and when people do not admire the person you believe yourself to be. This is where practice becomes real. In a quiet hall, with incense in the air and sacred words surrounding us, many things can appear settled. The face softens, the voice becomes gentle, the movements become careful. In such places, even the restless mind can borrow a kind of peace from the atmosphere. But daily life does not let us borrow for long. Daily life collects the debt. It asks, what remains when no one is watching? What remains when your comfort is disturbed? What remains when your image is threatened? What remains when your preferences are denied? That is why ordinary life is not an interruption to spiritual life. It is the proving ground of spiritual life. Anyone can feel devoted when conditions are pleasant. Anyone can speak about compassion when no one is opposing them. Anyone can appear detached when they are not being denied, criticized, ignored, or frightened. But let pressure enter the room, and what is hidden begins to speak. Irritation rises. Jealousy burns quietly. Fear tightens the chest. Attachment starts bargaining. The ego, which looks so humble in holy places, suddenly becomes a lawyer, a victim, a judge, and a king all at once. And this is not failure, this is revelation. Many people become discouraged at this point. They say, I have practiced for years. Why am I still angry? Why am I still jealous? Why am I still hurt by small things? But seeing the mind clearly is not a sign that practice is useless. Often it is the first sign that practice is finally becoming honest. Before, the poison was present but unseen. Now the mirror is clean enough to reflect it. That hurts, but it is grace. Daily life is a merciful mirror because it does not flatter us. It shows us where we still cling. It shows us where our identity is fragile. It shows us what kind of peace we have actually cultivated. Is it the peace of deep understanding, or only the peace of favorable conditions? Is it freedom, or simply temporary control over a carefully arranged environment? At home, this becomes painfully clear. The people closest to us often see the parts of us that the public never sees. A stranger may think we are patient. Our family knows whether we are patient when dinner is late, when the house is noisy, when someone forgets what we asked, when old wounds are touched without warning. It is one thing to chant beautifully. It is another thing to speak kindly to the person who has annoyed you for the 1000th time. It is one thing to study teachings on non-attachment. It is another thing to release the need to win every small argument. to be right in every conversation, to control the emotional temperature of the whole house. At work, another layer is revealed. Work exposes ambition, comparison, insecurity, and pride. There we learn whether we can act with integrity when reward is uncertain. There we see whether we can rejoice in another person's success without shrinking inside. There we discover how much of our identity is built from recognition. If someone corrects us in a meeting, what happens in the mind? Does the body harden? Does the heart close? Does a silent story begin? They do not respect me. They should not speak to me that way. I know more than they do. Sometimes the deepest practice in that moment is not dramatic. It is simply to notice the heat rising and not let it become a weapon. That small pause matters more than we think. A harsh word unspoken changes karma. A sarcastic reply, swallowed with awareness, changes karma. Choosing not to humiliate someone just because you have the chance changes karma. So much of spiritual growth is hidden inside moments too small for the world to celebrate. No music plays, no one applauds, no one posts about it. But in that quiet instant, a pattern either strengthens or loosens. This is why true practice can look very ordinary. It may look like breathing once before answering your spouse. It may look like noticing the need to defend yourself and choosing first to listen. It may look like admitting, "You are right, I was careless." It may look like apologizing without adding 10 sentences to protect your pride. It may look like returning money that no one would have known you kept. It may look like refusing to exaggerate your virtue, refusing to manipulate sympathy, refusing to perform kindness while secretly feeding resentment. It may look like cleaning up what you caused. It may look like staying honest when dishonesty would be convenient and invisible. This is the kind of practice that matures the soul, not glamorous, not mystical in appearance, not designed to impress, yet deeply transformative. There is also practice in the moment of being corrected. This is one of the clearest teachers in ordinary life. When someone points out our mistake, even gently, the ego often rushes to survive. It explains, excuses, redirects, blames context, blames childhood, blames stress, blames misunderstanding, blames almost anything rather than resting naked in truth. But if we can learn to feel that discomfort without immediately escaping it, something precious begins. We discover that being imperfect does not destroy us. We discover that image is not life. We discover that humility is not humiliation. We discover that the one who always must appear right is never at rest. And then there is control. So much suffering in daily life comes from this quiet addiction. The need for things, people, timing, and outcomes to obey our internal script. We want others to speak the way we would speak, move at the speed we would move, understand us without explanation, and change according to our schedule. We call this order, responsibility, even love, but often beneath it is fear. Fear that if we do not control, we will be disappointed. Fear that if we loosen our grip, life will expose our vulnerability. Practice enters exactly there, not by becoming passive, not by abandoning wisdom, but by softening the compulsion to dominate every moment. To loosen control is not to stop caring. It is to care without strangling life. It is to guide without possessing. It is to prepare without insisting. It is to act fully and still leave room for reality to be different from our demand. This becomes especially sacred when caring for aging parents. Few experiences reveal the heart more deeply. The roles begin to shift. The ones who once protected us may become forgetful, fragile, repetitive, fearful, or dependent. Old family pain may return just when tenderness is most needed. Duty and love may mix with exhaustion. Here, spiritual language is tested against sleeplessness, against inconvenience, against grief that begins before the final goodbye. Can we serve without dramatizing our sacrifice? Can we be present without demanding that the past be repaired first? Can we allow compassion to include boundaries, and boundaries to include compassion? These are not abstract questions. This is where the teachings put on human skin. Money also reveals much. Nothing exposes attachment quite like gain and loss. When income is threatened, when savings shrink, when someone owes us, when we must choose between generosity and security, the mind shows its training. Do we become small, secretive, and frightened? Do we build our worth on possession? Do we compare endlessly? Or can we remain careful without becoming hard, responsible without becoming worshipful of wealth, generous without becoming reckless? Money is not merely economic matter. It is moral matter, emotional matter, karmic matter. How we earn, spend, save, give, and desire shapes consciousness. And then there is disappointment, that quiet visitor who enters every human life. The promotion does not come. The relationship changes. The body does not heal as quickly as we hoped. The child chooses a path we would not have chosen. The friend pulls away. The dream we nourished for years remains unanswered. In these moments, our real spirituality is not what we say in public. It is how we meet what did not happen. Can we grieve without becoming bitter? Can we feel loss without turning life into accusation? Can we let the heart break open without letting it turn cruel? Forgiveness, too, belongs here, and real forgiveness is rarely quick. Mature practice does not force the heart into false purity. Sometimes forgiving slowly is the honest path. Sometimes all we can do at first is refuse revenge. Then, after that, refuse to rehearse hatred every day. Then, after that, begin to see the pain in the one who caused pain. Then, much later, release the wish that they suffer exactly as we suffered. This is still practice. Slow sincerity is better than spiritual performance. One of the hardest tests in ordinary life is dealing with people who do not admire us. We seldom admit how much energy we spend trying to be seen in a certain way. We want to be appreciated, respected, understood, maybe even quietly envied. But some people will not recognize our goodness. Some will misread us. Some will remain unimpressed no matter how much we give. If our peace depends on being mirrored beautifully by others, we will remain unstable. Practice teaches us to stop begging for identity from the eyes of the world. This does not mean becoming cold. It means becoming inwardly grounded enough that praise does not inflate us and disregard does not erase us. That kind of grounding takes time. It is built in repeated moments of remembrance. In the moment you want the last word and choose silence. In the moment you want to punish and choose restraint. In the moment you want to lie a little and choose honesty. In the moment you realize your hurt has become self-righteousness and you step back before speaking from poison. In the moment you notice envy and do not decorate it with philosophy. In the moment you see your own pettiness and, instead of collapsing into shame, you simply become more sincere. This is how liberation begins to enter behavior, not as an idea floating above life, but as consciousness shaping tone, timing, intention, and action. Every interaction becomes training. Every inconvenience becomes a teacher. Every conflict becomes a chance to observe karma forming in real time. Every relationship becomes a field where compassion can either remain sentimental or become embodied. This is why mature spirituality is less fascinated with appearing mystical and more committed to living truthfully. It becomes less concerned with looking advanced and more concerned with not deceiving oneself. Less intoxicated by spiritual image, more devoted to clean conduct. Less interested in extraordinary experiences, more willing to transform ordinary reactions. Because what is the use of speaking about higher states while wounding people with our tongue? What is the use of studying emptiness while clinging fiercely to opinion, status, and control? What is the use of devotional gestures if daily conduct still spreads fear, dishonesty, and pain? The holy and the ordinary were never separate. Washing dishes with resentment is part of the path. Answering a difficult message is part of the path. Sitting beside a hospital bed is part of the path. Paying debts is part of the path. Being overlooked is part of the path. Growing older is part of the path. Being misunderstood is part of the path. If we meet these moments with awareness, they become fire that purifies. If we meet them with blindness, they become habits that bind. So the question is not only what you believe, what you chant, what teacher you follow, or what teaching you can explain. The deeper question is this: what kind of person is your practice making you when life becomes inconvenient? More honest or more performative? More gentle or more fragile? More spacious or more controlling? More awake to others or more absorbed in your own spiritual identity? These are tender questions but necessary ones, because the path is not proven in isolated experiences of devotion. It is proven in the texture of daily living, in whether your presence brings less harm, in whether your mind recovers more quickly from hatred, in whether your heart becomes less theatrical and more true, in whether you can stand in the simple dignity of being human without decorating yourself as holy. And when daily life becomes the field of practice, another question begins to rise from somewhere quiet and vulnerable within us. If I have walked wrongly for years, if I have repeated harmful patterns for a long time, if I have wasted time, avoided truth, resisted correction, and strengthened the habits that bind me, is it already too late? That question does not come from weakness in many cases. It is the first honest question a person has asked in years. Not the question of how to feel special, or how to gain spiritual certainty, or how to prove devotion to others, but the raw and trembling question of someone who has finally stopped running from themselves. Is it too late? Have I gone too far? Have I harmed too much, wasted too much, misunderstood too much? We should not answer that question cheaply. We should not rush to comfort with empty phrases. Because there is real grief here. There are people who gave decades to confusion and called it faith. There are people who neglected their families while believing they were serving a higher purpose. There are people who hardened their hearts in the name of discipline. People who confused fear with reverence, performance with sincerity, stubbornness with commitment, self-importance with awakening. There are people who repeated words of wisdom with their mouths, while their minds were becoming narrower, more agitated, more proud, more cut off from reality. And when that begins to be seen clearly, sorrow naturally comes. It comes for the lost years. It comes for the tenderness that was never developed. It comes for the conversations that were never had, the apologies never given, the harms never noticed because the mind was too occupied, protecting its image of being right. Sometimes the sorrow is very quiet. Sometimes it breaks open all at once. A person looks back and realizes, I was not becoming free. I was becoming trapped in a more decorated prison. That realization hurts. It should hurt. It is the pain of illusion cracking. There may also be grief for those we influenced. This is one of the most difficult things to face. Maybe we passed on confusion to friends, children, students, or companions. Maybe we spoke with confidence when we had no clarity. Maybe we encouraged forms of practice that made people more fearful, more superstitious, more divided from common sense and kindness. Maybe we taught others to admire intensity instead of truth, to admire belonging instead of understanding, to obey instead of examining. If that has happened, the heart may feel very heavy, but heaviness when met honestly is not the end. It is the beginning of moral awakening. There is a kind of sorrow that destroys a person because it turns into self-hatred, and there is another kind of sorrow that becomes the doorway to humility. The first says, I am ruined, I am beyond repair, there is no point now. The second says, I see what I did not see, I cannot undo the past, but I will not lie about it anymore. That second sorrow is painful, but it is clean. It does not dramatize itself. It does not beg for pity. It simply bows to truth and begins to learn. So is it too late? If you are still alive, still able to listen, still able to recognize confusion as confusion, then no, it is not too late to turn. It may be late. It may be very late. There may be consequences already in motion that cannot be erased by one night of regret. Relationships may remain damaged. Habits may remain strong. The mind may still carry deep tendencies formed over many years. But late is not the same as impossible. Painful is not the same as hopeless. Severe consequences are not proof of cruelty. The law of cause and effect is exact, but it is not cruel. It does not punish to satisfy some cosmic anger. It simply unfolds according to what has been planted, repeated, protected, and nourished. If confusion has been fed, confusion bears fruit. If greed has been justified, greed bears fruit. If pride has been worshipped under a spiritual name, then pride deepens its roots. This is sobering, but that same law is also the reason hope is real. Because if causes create results, then new causes matter. A different seed, planted sincerely and cared for patiently, cannot be meaningless. A clear intention, embodied day after day, cannot be nothing. An honest correction in the heart is not a small event. People often think transformation must feel dramatic in order to be true. They imagine a great inner explosion, a perfect moment of surrender, a sudden purity that wipes away all confusion. But most real turning points do not look like that. Often they are quieter. A person stops pretending. A person admits, without ornament, "I do not understand as much as I thought." A person becomes willing to be corrected. A person begins again with simpler steps. A person prays less for spiritual status and more for the strength to be truthful. A person restrains the tongue, softens the ego, returns to basic ethics, learns to sit with discomfort without making a philosophy out of it. These are not flashy movements, but they are profound. The present moment is where this becomes possible. Not tomorrow in imagination, not in the fantasy of a future purified self. Now, this very mind as it is can stop adding one more layer of deception. This very heart, even if burdened, can choose not to continue in the same direction. This very life, even if much has been misspent, can still become the place where wandering begins to end. That is why awareness is so precious. The moment we truly see, karma is not erased, but it can be interrupted. The chain is no longer completely unconscious. The momentum of old habits may continue to pull, but now there is a witness. Now there is discernment. Now there is a chance, however small at first, to not obey every old impulse, to not call darkness light, to not baptize our attachments with sacred language, to not keep building the same suffering and expecting liberation from it. This is where honesty begins. And honesty, though simple, is one of the most powerful acts in spiritual life. Honest about what motives still drive us. Honest about where we are still vain, still reactive, still hungry for recognition, still afraid of being ordinary. Honest about what teachings we use to avoid responsibility. Honest about where we damaged trust. Honest about what we do not know. Such honesty can feel humiliating to the ego, but it is merciful to the soul. It ends the exhausting labor of maintaining a false self. From that honesty, a different future is planted, not guaranteed in fantasy, not claimed in arrogance, planted like a seed in real soil, quietly, repeatedly, through right understanding and right effort. Right understanding does not mean collecting spiritual ideas that make us sound wise. It means seeing more accurately what leads to suffering and what leads away from it. It means understanding that no ritual, no costume, no affiliation, no emotional intensity can replace the work of purifying greed, hatred, and delusion. It means understanding that the path must touch conduct, speech, relationship, livelihood, thought, and intention. Otherwise, it remains mostly theater. And right effort does not mean straining violently to become enlightened by force. It means the disciplined, steady work of abandoning what is unwholesome and cultivating what is wholesome. It means trying again after failure. It means not negotiating with known poisons. It means guarding the mind without becoming harsh. It means being patient enough to let genuine change unfold at the speed of reality, not the speed of spiritual fantasy. This is why, When a person realizes they have gone astray, the answer is not to chase another extreme, not to panic and reinvent themselves overnight, not to perform repentance as spectacle, not to seek some dramatic spiritual rebirth in a single evening so that the pain of regret can be quickly escaped. That too can become ego. That too can become confusion wearing sacred clothes. What is needed is simpler, and because it is simpler, return to what is harder. Keep your precepts, sincerely speak more truthfully, harm less, listen more, bow less to your image and more to reality. Study carefully, practice consistently, let devotion become quieter and more grounded. Let discipline become cleaner and less theatrical. Let humility become practical. If you have harmed, make amends where possible. If you misled others, stop misleading them. If you do not know, say you do not know. If your mind is restless, begin there. If your heart is proud, begin there. If your life is disordered, begin there. A genuine path does not require you to become instantly luminous. It asks you to become sincere. And sincerity, sustained over time, is no small thing. A person who spent years building confusion may still spend the rest of life undoing it. But to undo even a little is meaningful. To refrain from causing one more cycle of harm is meaningful. To spare others from inheriting our blindness is meaningful. To die facing truth rather than defending illusion is meaningful. Never underestimate the value of a late clarity. A lamp lit at dusk is still a lamp. It does not turn noon into noon, but it keeps the night from being total darkness. So yes, there is urgency. There must be. A wrong path can cost more than comfort, more than status, more than one season of life. It can shape consciousness for a very long time. It can deepen habits that survive every outer change. It can keep a being wandering through suffering, mistake after mistake, life after life, because the root confusion was never challenged. This is not a small matter. We should not treat it lightly, but urgency does not require panic. In fact, panic usually clouds the mind and drives it back into grasping. The urgency that helps is sober. It is tender. It also says, do not hate yourself for waking up late. Both are true. Delay is dangerous. Self-condemnation is also dangerous. One keeps us asleep in denial. The other keeps us asleep in despair. The middle way is braver, to grieve what has been lost without making identity out of grief, and to begin correcting the course without demanding instant absolution. Perhaps this is the mercy hidden inside the truth. The past matters deeply. It cannot be dismissed. Yet the present is not closed. The door is narrow, but it is open. And sometimes, one clear turning of the heart, truly clear, truly humble, truly willing to walk differently, becomes the beginning of the end of a very long wandering. Not the end in one night, not the end by declaration, but the beginning of the end. The first real step out of circles mistaken for progress. The first real breath after years inside a sealed room. The first act of reverence that is not aimed at preserving the self, but at surrendering the self to what is true. If that turning is happening now, however late, then protect it. Do not decorate it. Do not announce it too quickly. Do not use it to build a new identity as the one who has awakened from error. Simply protect it with practice. Feed it with truthfulness. Strengthen it with restraint, study, reflection, compassion, and patient effort. Let it become strong enough to survive moods, praise, criticism, loneliness, old cravings, and the memory of who you used to think you were. Because hope, if it is real, is not sentimental. It is disciplined. It is made visible in the next choice, the next word, the next restraint, the next act of honesty. It is made visible in how you sit with regret without turning away, in how you stop asking to feel spiritually important and begin asking to be inwardly clean, in how you become more available to reality than to the stories your ego prefers. And from that place, the heart can bear both truths at once. That much may have been wasted, and that something sacred still remains to be done. That the path can be missed in terrifying ways. and that it can also be found again in startling simplicity, that countless lifetimes may be lost through delusion, and yet the movement that begins to end that loss always happens here, in this moment, when pretense falls and a human being finally becomes willing to walk in the right direction. And that is why the warning at the beginning is not exaggerated. A doctor who makes a mistake may take one life. A teacher who goes astray may damage a generation. But when a human being practices wrongly in the deepest sense, the damage is harder to see and far more difficult to measure because it does not end at the surface of one event, one body, one decade, or one social consequence. It shapes the mind that continues. It strengthens confusion at the level from which choices are made again and again. It teaches consciousness to trust illusion, to decorate bondage, to call sleep awakening, and to mistake self-deception for faith. Worldly errors are painful because their results are visible. We can point to the wound. We can count the loss. We can see the ruined home, the broken trust, the body that did not survive, the child who grew under false guidance. But spiritual error often hides inside the language of goodness. It can wear robes. It can quote scripture. It can kneel, bow, fast, chant, give, preach, gather followers, and still move in the wrong direction. That is why it is so dangerous. Not because spirituality is false, but because what is highest can also be imitated most easily by the ego. And when the ego learns to imitate holiness, a person can remain lost while feeling profoundly convinced that they have been found. This is the tragedy, not merely that people suffer, but that they suffer while believing their suffering is proof of advancement. Not merely that they are attached, but that they rename attachment as devotion. Not merely that they fear letting go, but that they call fear wisdom. The deepest loss is not only doing wrong, it is becoming unable to recognize wrongness within oneself, because one has wrapped it in sacred language, spiritual identity, and group approval. That is why sincerity alone is not enough. Sincerity is precious, it matters. A sincere heart is better than a cynical one. A person who genuinely longs for truth has already preserved something beautiful in this human life. But longing by itself cannot replace clear seeing. Intensity cannot replace wisdom. Effort cannot replace right direction. A person may walk day and night with complete determination, but if the road is leading deeper into the forest, speed will not save them. Zeal will not rescue them. Emotion will not correct the map. Many people have ruined themselves, not because they were evil, but because they were unexamined. They wanted comfort more than truth, certainty more than humility, identity more than transformation. They wanted a path that would preserve the one who suffers, instead of exposing the one who clings. They wanted spiritual practice to bless their habits, not uproot them. They wanted the appearance of surrender without the death of vanity, and so they remained busy, devoted, expressive, committed, and inwardly unchanged. This is why right view matters so much, not as philosophy for debate, not as doctrine for pride, but as orientation. Right view is what keeps compassion from becoming indulgence, discipline from becoming cruelty, devotion from becoming emotional addiction, and meditation from becoming escape. Without right view, even beautiful practices can be bent towards self-protection. Without right view, religion becomes costume, ritual becomes anesthesia, and community becomes a mirror in which everyone agrees to help everyone else avoid the truth. And humility must stand beside right view, because even correct teachings can be misused by an arrogant mind. A proud person can turn wisdom into a weapon. A proud seeker can collect spiritual language the way others collect wealth. A proud practitioner can become refined in expression, subtle in theory, admired in appearance, and still remain untouched in the place that matters most. Humility is what allows a person to be interrupted by truth. It is what allows the heart to say, I may be wrong. It is what makes repentance possible. It is what loosens the grip of self-importance, so that learning can become real. Ethical conduct matters for the same reason. Not because morality is a social decoration, but because a life of dishonesty, indulgence, cruelty, manipulation, or heedlessness makes the mind muddy. One cannot repeatedly nourish greed and then expect clarity. One cannot wound others carelessly and then expect the heart to become gentle in meditation. One cannot build an identity around appetites and then wonder why stillness feels impossible. Conduct is not separate from consciousness. The way we live shapes the instrument through which we seek truth. And direct inner transformation matters, because information is not liberation. Understanding a teaching is not the same as being changed by it. Speaking beautifully about ego is not the same as seeing it arise in real time. Admiring compassion is not the same as becoming less harmful. Defending truth is not the same as surrendering to it. A person can spend years circling around awakening through concepts, affiliations, preferences, and borrowed language, while the ancient machinery of vanity, fear, resentment, and craving remains almost untouched. So the call at the end is not outward first, it is inward. Before correcting the world, examine the hand that wants to correct it. Before diagnosing the blindness of others, examine what in you resists being seen. Before searching for false teachers everywhere, ask what in you still desires to be flattered, reassured, entertained, or spiritually seduced. Before condemning religious corruption, look carefully at the small corruptions you excuse in private. The exaggeration, the vanity, the resentment you feed, the habit of blaming, the attachment to being special, the refusal to admit fear, the subtle bargaining by which you offer practice to truth, only on the condition that truth does not take away the self you worship. This is where the real path begins to become honest. Not when we build a better image, but when we grow tired of lying to ourselves. Not when we sound profound, but when we become simple enough to see what we are actually doing. Not when we achieve a spiritual identity, but when we stop using identity as shelter. Not when we feel superior to the lost, but when we recognize how easily we ourselves can be lost. There is a grief in this recognition. There has to be, because if we are honest, we begin to see how much life can be spent on distraction dressed as meaning. How many prayers were negotiations, how many vows were performances, how many acts of service were secretly hungry for acknowledgement, how much discipline was fueled by fear. How much belief was inherited but never tested in silence? How many years passed while the heart remained defended? But this grief is not punishment. It is purification. It is the sorrow of waking up from a long confusion and realizing that something precious was at risk. It is the pain of seeing that our lifetimes are not toys to be thrown before delusion. They are rare, they are fragile, they are difficult to obtain, to be human, to hear truth, to have enough awareness to question oneself, to still possess the ability to turn around. This is no small thing. This is grace, even if it arrives as discomfort, especially if it arrives as discomfort. So do not worship appearances anymore. Do not bow to tone, cost charisma, intensity, or collective excitement. Do not assume that what is old is true, or what is popular is deep, or what is emotionally powerful is spiritually clean. Do not protect your ego simply because it has learned to speak in sacred language. Do not keep defending the habits that keep you asleep. And do not postpone the honesty that must eventually come. Because postponement also has a cost. There are people who keep telling themselves, later I will practice sincerely. Later I will examine myself. Later I will let go. Later I will stop pretending. Later I will face what I already know. But later is one of the most dangerous words in spiritual life. Later becomes a season, then a decade, then a life, habit. Later becomes character. Later becomes momentum. And momentum, if unchallenged, does not simply pause at death and politely disappear. It carries forward. What is repeated becomes tendency. What is protected becomes identity. What is unexamined becomes destiny. This is why the warning must remain strong. When we practice wrongly, we do not merely fail to gain something noble. We participate in the continuation of confusion. We reinforce the very structures of mind that keep suffering moving. We deepen grooves that will be entered again. We hand more of our time, our clarity, our birth, our opportunity, and our precious human awareness over to forces that do not love us, even if they speak through our own familiar voice. That is not a small loss. That is not a poetic loss. That is an existential loss. And yet even here, compassion must remain. Because the point is not despair. The point is responsibility. The point is not to become crushed by the magnitude of possible error, but to become sincere in a deeper way than mere emotion. To become careful, to become teachable, to become ethically awake, to become willing to lose what is false in order to discover what is true, to stop asking spirituality to confirm us and start allowing truth to transform us. Imagine, then, a traveler on a long road. All day he has walked with confidence, believing he was heading home. The sun lowers, the air cools, shadows lengthen across the ground, birds fall quiet. In the fading light, he finally notices the signs he ignored, the landmarks he misunderstood, the subtle turning where he should have gone another way. For a moment, sorrow comes. He sees how far he has wandered. He feels the weight of wasted hours. He understands that if he keeps moving in the same direction merely to protect his pride, night will take him deeper into unfamiliar land. That moment is sacred, not because he was wrong, but because he sees that he is wrong and does not look away. Not because the road was easy, but because the truth becomes more important than the image of himself as a wise traveler. Not because daylight will last forever, but because there is still enough light to turn. This is where many lives are decided, not in grand public declarations, but in that private inward turning, in that quiet refusal to continue worshipping delusion, in that sober acceptance that one must begin again, more honestly, more humbly, more cleanly than before, in that willingness to walk back to the real path. While there is still breath, still awareness, still conscience, still human birth, still time. And if there is one final thing to remember, let it be this. Your lifetimes are too precious to offer to illusion. Your mind is too sacred to hand over to vanity. Your suffering is too serious to decorate. Your longing for freedom is too beautiful to waste on imitation. Do not give endless years to what flatters you and call it faith. Do not give your conscience to the crowd and call it belonging. Do not give your blindness a shrine and call it devotion. Turn inward. Look carefully. Be honest. Be humble enough to learn. Be brave enough to stop. Be sincere enough to change. Let practice become less about being seen and more about being cleansed. Less about defending what you already think and more about discovering what is actually true. Less about spiritual appearance and more about freedom from greed, hatred, delusion, and self-deception. Then the warning at the heart of this teaching will not remain merely frightening. It will become protective. It will guard your life. It will purify your intention. It will remind you, again and again, that the path matters because direction matters. And direction matters because consciousness continues carrying the consequences of what it loves, what it repeats, and what it refuses to question. So let the warning stay with you, not as terror but as clarity. If we practice wrongly, the loss is not small, not brief and not someone else's. It is intimate, it is cumulative, it reaches farther than we can see. And that is why the only worthy ending is a sober and compassionate return to personal responsibility. The path matters because a mistaken direction in spiritual life does not merely delay success. It deepens suffering across lifetimes until truth is faced with humility and clarity.